All right, it is January 19th, and I hope everybody's hungry because we are ready to cook tonight. I'll be joined by our good friends, in no particular order, David the Leo King Palmer, Evan Nathaniel Grim, and of course, Mario Garza from Symbolic Studies. And over the course of the next few hours, we're going to dive right into where we are astrologically and symbolically on the eve of what I believe will be an incredibly important event and time, no matter how you view it or how you are willing to embrace it, accept it, reject it. It is undeniable that the return of Donald Trump on the Sun-Pluto conjunction in Aquarius has deeply symbolic import and meaning. So we're going to get into it tonight. And of course, our guests are all very well versed in astrology and symbolism, and I'm thrilled to have them on. But before we do, I have a little bit of business, and that, of course, is to support our sponsor of the show, which is True Hemp Science. And I was just by Chris's shop yesterday in Austin, Texas. They were named the #1 CBD supplier shop headquarters in Austin in 2024. So everybody just raves about the product, and I do as well, because it is all organically sourced, and Chris is a mad scientist and creates some of the cleanest blends of CBD and CGA and THC. So all you got to do is spend $100 or more and type in 15MINS. That's 15MINS. When you check out, you get a goodie bag, which is like an order on top of your order. And then there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. And there's free shipping when you get $150 or more. So remember, 15MINS and THS, TrueHempScience.com, your one-stop shop for all things CBD. All right, let's bring the boys on. Let's get into the cinema view. And let's see what we got here. Come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's try this. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, let's not try that. Let's get rid of that. Move from the studio. All right, let's try this. 1, 2, 3. Cinema view. Okay, we got him. Here we go. That's the layout we're looking for. All right, so theoretically, to my, I guess, left is Mario Garza from Symbolic Studies, and Mario joined us this past October at our gathering here in the Hill Country and did just an amazing presentation on Libra. And Mario's got like a brilliant kind of cosmology about the pole star, and it's not just an idea, it really is almost like a way of living in some ways. It's like this really refined and elegant journey through the middle path. So Mario, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you here, and looking forward to your contribution tonight.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for the invite. When I found out that David and Evan were going to be on too, I was like, this is going to be rad. I met Evan at your conference, and I had a great time when I was there hanging out with you and meeting your people and stuff. So, you have a really, really great crew of folks around you. So I'll just put it that way. You've got a lot of awesome fans. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm real lucky, yeah. For sure. And it's great to have you here as well. And of course, representing Orange County, we got David the Leo King Palmer and Evan Nathaniel Grim. Fellas, what's happening?
What's going on?
What's up? How's it going? I'm a LA refugee in Orange County now.
You're refugees. Yeah. So Evan, are you cool? Is your place okay? Do you have any crazy stories you want to share about the Inferno?
Actually, yeah. So luckily my house is unsinged, I guess, but definitely like wrapped up in all the smoke and stuff that's in the air. But 2 days before the fires broke out, I did like a webinar for my Substack subscribers about the astrology of 2025. And I created like this image to symbolize the whole year. And, I was just kind of going with, my creativity, whatever was coming out of my subconscious. And I had like, the Bing AI come up with this image of an actor running from a vehicle that was on fire. And there was like a fire all over the image. And there was a drone overhead, like dropping a delivery box in the fire. And I just kept saying, like, I feel like there's something with like firefighters saving people from burning buildings. And, I was just kind of channeling this stuff. And anyways, 2 days later, I actually had to take a flight out of LA. That was like Tuesday morning, the 7th. And my flight was like 3 hours before the fires actually started. I was traveling to Minnesota for my grandfather's funeral. So it was just like a lot of life events at once. But, I was able to like completely avoid the fires. But I was just watching the alerts come in. And, my house is like right in between, basically. Like equidistant from the Palisades and the Eden fires. But I was like, I almost feel like my grandfather's spirit was like getting me out of LA. Number one, but number two, I was like looking back at my webinar and I was like, now it makes sense why I was like depicting this guy running from a fire. I was like so weirded out by that because it like didn't totally make sense with like some of the analysis I was doing. But anyway, so now I'm just kind of hunkering down in San Diego County actually for a few weeks just to like wait this out because I don't know what's coming next. But I was just up in LA today. And, you feel it. I mean, you still feel it like the, burning in your eyes and your throat if you're not careful. So, it's definitely, it's going to hang around for a while just with the toxins in the air. So.
Well, it sounds like you got just about everything right with your vision, except for the firemen saving people. I think they had a bit of an issue with that. So did you see this? Check his gain on the mic there, David. It's still a little hot.
I'll have to get up for that. Am I coming in too hot?
You seem to be all right to me on my end.
So I'm okay, but Evan's too hot.
You're good. You're good.
I think so. Yeah. In comparison.
I'm just trying. I hear it's good, but then people are saying he's too hot. So I'm just trying to understand. Am I good and he's not, or are we both good?
No, you're good. Evan's hot.
Okay. Well, I'll put it on Evan. I'll go fix the mics.
Okay. I'll bring the mic back a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like I was just gonna add. I feel like only a Scorpio stellium would choose to live a life where like they're in New York City during the first COVID wave, and then they move to LA, and then they're part of the LA fires. Oh, and I was also spending time in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020 during the summer of Floyd. So, it's like all part of this almost like a decision I made before I came in of like, hey, like why not just witness these, extreme scenarios.
Right. Yeah. Wild, man. I know. I was definitely thinking about you when everything was going on. Curious what your story ended up being with all of that. Looks like Robert is having internet issues tonight. There he is. Robert, you're back now.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Here I'm going to have this really big show, and then I'm going to have internet issues. Yeah, Uranus in my sixth house has not been kind. I have to say, it has been an interesting, disruptive influence on everyday activities. So, is David getting the other mic together there, Evan?
Yeah.
I just need. He's amazing.
All right, so.
Yeah, we're still working on it, but it seems.
So I'm asking if
know
from them if you're good.
Okay, am I sounding good now? Because David's saying it sounds good on our side.
I think it's better.
Okay.
Mario, is it good?
Is it? Is it clear though?
You know what? I was just adjusting my mic, so I got a text saying that mine could be a little bit higher, so I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, everybody in chat says you're good. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody in chat says
it looks like the comments
so
were saying Evan's great now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, problem solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Bring David back on.
What up? What up?
Well, we're glad you're okay, Evan, and you're out of harm's way. Hey, David.
What up? Good to be with you both. I'm happy to be here as always. It's good to have Evan here in the studio. I'm glad to meet Mario. And of course, I'm down to always be with Robert Phoenix to get down and dirty with the astrology in the world. So this is pretty epic. Super stoked.
It is epic. Well, why don't we get going, since I think we've hopefully ironed out all the technical issues. The theme of this show is this Aquarian, I'm going to call it an Aquarian aeon, right? Because we're in a very different part of the universe right now. And just over the last 48 hours, this whole Trump coin thing has been a complete and utter freak show. And this is all happening within 48 hours of his inauguration. And I think they just launched the Melania coin, which is now outperforming the Trump coin. And so why don't we start here? I kind of want to talk about this, and then we can get into the astrology. I'll throw the chart up for tomorrow and the inauguration, and then we can start to go deeper and dive into this thing. But David and Evan, what are your thoughts on the explosion of this meme coin? 2 meme coins now, 48 hours before we officially inaugurate Trump. And then what does it say about the future of money and currency? What do you guys have on that?
Yeah, I mean, I still haven't tracked all the details of that story, but just, conceptually, I would say it is, very Aquarian, this idea of like theoretically giving the masses or the collective access to wealth, overnight through something like a meme coin. Obviously just as quickly as it can go up, it can go down. So, we saw that with the Hawk Tuah girl, right? She had her own coin or something like that, if I remember correctly. But, it definitely is disruptive. It definitely signals that, I don't know. I mean, I think it just throws the whole concept of money into question, like what sort of is like the value of like the fiat currency versus, just crypto in general. But I think again, just conceptually, this is, very, very on brand with Pluto and the sun lining up in Aquarius. I do think that, again, in that sort of water bearer fashion, like it is theoretically spreading value. But again, the sort of drawback to that though is like, easy sort of like money, like any easy money definitely raises red flags in my book, because you can have people like buying into this, putting all their savings into it. And if the hype goes away, then like, what happens then? So it's definitely very fascinating, but unstable at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel that it's the day before the Sun Pluto actually do conjunct to set off this Pluto Aquarius transit. Uranus is the dispositor, and it's still in Taurus retrograde. And so we're going to see Uranus ingress into Gemini this year. So I don't think we actually know what it really looks like. I think these are kind of these older systems since the beginning of 2008 when Bitcoin came in, playing their kind of last tunes. I think the idea of what we're going to be doing financially is going to be way more intense and different than we even could fathom at this moment. And I really do feel like this meme coin thing is kind of like the last straw that you play of the last Pluto Capricorn 16 years of crypto. I feel like it's going to have like any value system, something of value behind it. And I do feel it's going to be more technological, right? And so I think it's going to be more based on, do you actually have all the GPUs for your AI center? Stuff like that is more wilder than we could even fathom at this moment. So I think it's just kind of the last dying breath of the Pluto Capricorn system, to be honest with you. That's my version, though.
What do you got, Mario? Got any insight into this?
Yeah, as it relates to, I don't know too much about it, but as it relates to Aquarius, I just think it's interesting that obviously Aquarius is the cupbearer, the water bearer, and the words that we use as it relates to money. There's a lot of watery symbolism there, right? So we refer to the flow of money, right? The flow of water. We refer to it as currency, right? Reminds me of current. We put money into a bank, not unlike the bank of a river. Something along these lines. And of course, watery symbolism as it connects to Aquarius is absolutely massive, incredibly deep. One of the things I wanted to bring up is just this idea of the urn of Aquarius, and how most people, obviously, they're going to think of water being in that urn. But really, when you look at it, this container is an allegory for so many different types of things. Right. It's basically, it's been said that it contains potential or ether, pure energy, spirit, right? Electricity is actually an interesting one. Aquarius in one of my resources is actually referred to as the light bearer, not the water bearer. And this is kind of like an alternative title for it. And electricity and technology have a lot to do with Aquarius. And so literally even like the fact that the symbol for Aquarius, right, it's those two squiggly lines indicative of waves, watery waves. But I think you can also take into account too, like airwaves, Wi-Fi signals,
Sure.
things like
Yeah.
that. So there's a whole entire tech side to Aquarius. And I would even say too, the axis between Aquarius and Leo as well. There's a lot going on with electricity and technology and things like that. So those are a few of the things that kind of come to mind. But mostly the watery symbolism with currency and money.
Yeah, and there's the phrase, well, the stock is underwater, right? Which is
Yeah.
another watery symbol. So David, I want to throw this back out to you and Evan. It seems to me like, again, this is kind of an Aquarian model that we're looking at. It seems to me like we've come to the end of the old money system, right? Trump has said that he wants to get rid of the IRS, right? He said that that he even wants to get rid of income tax, and it feels like we're reaching the edges of the ability to keep money in the system with liquidity and keep the assets and the value up. And we've kind of come to the end of what started in 1913 in a lot of ways, right? And so for either the United States to retain some kind of financial dominance in the world or take on BRICS, which is its own entity unto itself, it seems like we're going to have to come up with some kind of an Aquarian idea here, because the fiat money system, which is kind of an extension of asset-based transactions, it seems like its time has come. So if we're not going to move into electronic currency, or we're not going to move into Bitcoin, which, by the way, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and David Sachs all have major positions in, and all of whom influenced Trump heavily, where is this thing going to go? How are we going to transact as we move into this very interesting time?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty convoluted. I think when you think about crypto, a lot of the criticisms are either that it's a speculative asset. Can you hear me?
Mario, did you hear that, Mario?
Yeah, so
Am I talking to?
I think you could just let Evan roll with it.
oh, is my
And I feel like I'm on a fucking AOL dial-up connection now.
everything good? Oh, okay. Well, either way, I think the cryptocurrency issue really comes down to, the criticism is that it's either a speculative asset at best, or there's just not a fixed quantity for a lot of these cryptocurrencies, and so it's like hard to really, figure out what the value actually is. I understand that Bitcoin is supposed to be like digital gold, but I think that there's a bigger story above this, which is, what is like loyalty at this point to, I don't know, a lot of American concepts, right? Like, we just had the TikTok temporary ban, and like people on TikTok are like, I'll just go over to Red Note now, and I'll just like go to some other, Chinese app and start learning Mandarin. And it's like, this whole concept of like borders is starting to mean less and less for some people, at least. And it's like, that's like one of the biggest variables, I think, during, this upcoming year or 2 years is like, what exactly is like the allegiance to a number of, I guess, again, American instruments or platforms or whatever. So, that it seems to be trending towards we seem to be trending towards a world where people are wanting some kind of like universal currency. You think about, just to add in another concept, like translator earbuds, like, eventually everything's going to be seamless, frictionless in the way that we interface with different cultures and around the world. So, that's like sort of something I'm like paying attention to. And I think just under that umbrella of sort of like, I guess the, I don't know what the word is, like universalization of things. You have to just assume at that point that like fiat currency is going to experience more and more headwinds. But, it has to be said that, again, I'm not out here being like crypto is like the savior, crypto is the answer, because again, it's a highly speculative asset. And, a universe in which Bitcoin is worth $1 million is also a universe in which that can't be liquidated into much of anything, right? Because if it was worth $1 million, I feel like the dollar is basically worth nothing. So, so I'm coming into this conversation as a skeptic of cryptocurrency for sure.
Yeah, and I would say it's interesting that Secretary Yellen of the Treasury left this note to the speaker saying, basically, the debt's so bad, we don't have much liquidity in the government yet. I hope that you can help make sure that we are able to pay our debts. So it's really interesting. The Biden administration just literally left everything empty, us a massive amount of debt. It does feel like the fiat system, especially the Nixon version of it, and the oil being the backing and debt being the main focus. It's interesting to see Trump wanting to grab Greenland or add Canada and annex Canada. It feels like when you look at mortgages, this is the first time you've ever seen the Fed lower the rates, but the rates of mortgages go up, right? So we're seeing all these things we've never seen before. So it does feel like it's come to its close. I think one of the weird things I've been saying, and I might sound crazy for this, but I feel like land and mortgages and it feels like they're about to just like do what they did in 1933. Instead of pulling people's gold, it feels almost like, well, we need your land to back it, so here's a reverse mortgage, and you don't need to be in your senior years. I don't care who you are, but when you die, you don't have to pay that anymore, and you won't have to pay taxes anymore, but we'll get the land when you pass away, who's ever on the title or the deed. It does feel very much like there's going to be, to get to some sort of universal thing, they're going to ask for something again. They're already going to have to tell people that, the traditional Social Security, the traditional IRAs, all these things that people have their money saved, plus with the government being the number one employer in America over the last 4 years, it does feel very much like they're going to try to say, just this one last thing and you get this, but that one last thing would probably be the death to your freedom of prosperity. So, I don't care if it's Trump or if it's left or right, it feels like it's been set up on both sides for something that looks too good to be true. And I think with us at the end of this Pisces Neptune, the North Node's here, it does feel very much like we better pay attention and not just believe Oz and think it is what it is. So even I think a lot of this meme coin stuff and even the crypto markets has also been another gold bullion kind of moment of the 1930s after the crash in order to still keep the money in the system in some sort of way. So that's where I'm at with it.
David, you have a lot of knowledge, historical knowledge about the Revolutionary War and what was going on. Uranus and Aquarius, right? It really takes off at that time. What was the state of the colony's finances at that time? Is there any correlation between what was happening then and what's happening now, by any chance?
Well, yeah. So it was the Continental Congress and then the Continental Army, right? And so the Continental money started to be printed, and the colonies had made some big trade deals, which were more like, hey, don't send the tea over, don't send the tobacco over. And so people in the colonies actually would go without it at the same time as people in England, right? So there was this kind of like trade war that began. The problem is that the Continental money didn't have much backing behind it. And the way that the British tried to get rid of the war and quell the war while it started was to make counterfeit money. So they were counterfeiting the Continental money so that the troops would have this overinflated money that was worth nothing. It was, believe it or not, Benjamin Franklin who was in charge of making the money, as much as he was in other areas like diplomacy and so forth. But he was able to catch it because he intentionally spelt Continental incorrectly on the money. And the British, because they're British, said, you know what, we're going to actually look at these people. They did it wrong and they spelt it correctly. So it was a way for him to see what was not true currency and what was their currency. But it was never worth anything. And then there was a lot of IOUs, which is exactly what happened in 1933 when the whole entire federal system stopped for 2 weeks. The first week they thought about giving IOUs out. And because all the companies to survive, like the trains and the toothpaste companies and the drugstores, started doing IOUs to keep people buying things. And so the government thought of doing that. And the same thing happened during the Revolutionary War, which was, we don't have the money to pay you right now, but eventually we will. And so what's funny is this Continental money became this temporary thing at the beginning of Pluto and Aquarius. And then by the time that the war was over, that money stayed around for a while because there was no constitutional convention until much later after the war. And so it really became taking all the loyalists' properties, so all the properties that were in New York and all of the 13 colonies that were loyalist, they kicked them all out, threw them into Canada, or they had to go home. And then they did local auctions for people who wanted to buy it, who actually had gold and silver, to try and kind of bring some sort of asset to the Continental money. And then eventually they got rid of the Continental money and turned it into the dollar. So it does feel like we're in that weird interim moment where it's like, yeah, people are using this and people are using that. And everybody is kind of like, we're using everything at this moment, right? If you think of people are using PayPal while at the same time they might be using a firm, and sure, that might be off certain currency like the dollar, but in many ways now with like things like PayPal over the years, right? You can exchange currencies. You can do it in different ways. And then, of course, we're at a place now where we're seeing people just make coins on their own and then have some sort of value attached to it through different currencies. So it feels like we're going to be in this interim here for the next 4 to 5 years of there's really no backing at all, but people are just like, whatever works. And so it does feel like we're going to go into a sloppy phase with it. But I do think that was also the weird part of Uranus and Gemini, which we're about to ingress into, is it does become wherever the people kind of just work it out with that Pluto in Aquarius at the same time. So we have to remember, though, that it does become a time where there becomes some people that are against freedom and not good. We'll take all your land. We'll take all your stuff. So it does feel like with Neptune at the end of Pisces with the Civil War transit, it does feel very similar because same thing happened, right? Whenever we saw the Confederacy come, they had their own currency. And so then, of course, the carpetbaggers came and all the people after the war and took and taxed the shit out of the people in the South that were against the Union. And so the people in the South never really got a way to get out of debt for so long. And that's why you see the South today really poor still.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
just
a very interesting time because I believe. Go ahead, Mario.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. everything in the modern world appears to be a copy of a copy of a copy. And just like a copy, copy machine or something, it's like the 10th copy of a thing isn't going to look as good as the original thing, right? And so everything is kind of an echo of something that truly existed and was real at one point. You can say, you go to a church today versus a church, however long ago, and you can kind of see that this is the case, your average church. Or it's the same thing with schools and hospitals, and like every single institution basically is kind of this, basically doing the same thing where it's like, hospitals aren't really, trying to heal you so much anymore, right? It's like they're destroying health in so many different ways. The education system isn't really educating you, right? And so everything is kind of just like this like echo of this original thing. And so it makes sense that the same thing would happen with currency and money and minting money and everything else, right? It's just going to be this further removal from an original sort of like asset or something that actually really truly contains value. Not saying that people can't make money and short-term gains, playing, this whole entire game with cryptocurrencies and everything else. But it just seems like that's just the trajectory of the modern world with seemingly everything, and also just the fact that, there's a deep, deep alchemical esoteric history when it comes to money. You can read about the Knights Templars setting up the first banks as people from Europe were going back to the Promised Land, right? That was the whole entire thing behind it. And so you can deposit your silver or gold into a Templar bank, and then they would give you basically a sheet. It has all sorts of esoteric encodings on it, and then you can take your money out somewhere along the pilgrimage route and everything else. So that by just putting your money into a bank that way and then having a representation of a real storage of value, you're kind of removing yourself a little bit from having that thing, that actual true asset, at your disposal. And then, just credit cards and just everything, the modern world, how we kind of use currency now, it makes tons of sense that cryptocurrency, digital currency, whether you like it or not, it's coming at some point, whether it's happening this year and it really takes off and becomes, adopted, by normal everyday people, or it takes another 5-10 years or whatever. It seems like that's just the trajectory sort of everything. It's a real sort of like force or something that I don't think personally can kind of be stopped.
Yeah, I'm with you. And based on the astrology, based on the astrology, I think it's inevitable, and especially when Uranus goes into Gemini and sends this thing into warp speed, right? Hyperdrive. And I'd like to throw this out to all three of you. And the idea here is the velocity of change.
You might have to repeat that one, Robert, if you're still here with us.
When things start to happen very quickly and almost simultaneously, like Terrence McKenna, sort of end game, right, where all this novelty starts hitting us at once. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the velocity of change and how people are going to deal with this, because it's coming, and I think it's really quickly.
Yeah.
We missed out.
I agree. I was.
We missed out. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add. Well, first of all, I was going to add to Mario's point about money, because I think we're all one layer removed, and oftentimes from our money, right? The whole idea of like fractionalized banking, and the bank owning or nobody actually having access to all their money at once. I can imagine a Pluto in Aquarius scenario where it's like, okay, suddenly the banks can't, which has happened, like suddenly the banks can't get us our money, and we can't like liquidate or take anything out of our accounts, or there's like a cyber attack. I mean, the idea of money is like sort of has become very intangible now. But I also think to Robert's question about the pace of change, I think it's pretty disorienting because humans have not evolved, as quickly as I guess technology has, right? Like there's, humans are still, for example, only really wired to have like 25 to 50 relationships in their life. And yet, well, all four of us, like we have audiences, right, where we're connecting with, millions of people or however many. And yet it's like, we're trying to figure out still like, okay, but, community still matters and like having close friends matters. And I just feel like we just live in this world that as it moves faster, and we are still, again, like operating at our speed of, 10,000 years ago in terms of our perception of reality. I do think that it can create like disorientation and hysteria in the collective, like even this like TikTok ban, like that's crazy to process, like 170 million people like having a drug taken away from them and then to have it reintroduced 12 hours later. Like the human psyche can only take so much change at once. And so I think that just that concept alone of, again, this sort of gap between the sort of the natural human experience and the pace of evolution, that in of itself are the ingredients for revolution and, dissatisfaction and dissension. So that's like that in a lot of ways, Robert, I think that is like almost the primary concern. It's like, how do we even process? How do we even process like what it means to be human now?
Right. We used to have a tether of what it meant to be human, but somewhere along the way, that got fairly diffused. You couldn't even get somebody in front of Congress to agree on what a woman was, right? Like they'd have these these arm wrestling debates. Well, don't you have a degree in this? Can't you talk about it? And now we're going to have to talk about what it's like to interact with non-humans through AI and through robotics, and all this is coming very quickly over the course of the next couple of years. And it's all those outer planets with Uranus and Gemini, sextiling Pluto in Aquarius, which I think is going to be the next real economic boom. But unlike the internet and some of the other waves that people have been able to ride, I think robotics is going to be really capitalized by a small and select group of people. And maybe a few others if you get stock in, I don't know, Optimus Prime or something like that. But David, I'd love for you to chime in here on this idea of the velocity of change and how quickly it's about to come, and how do we deal with it?
Well, like every beginning of a Pluto transit, something looks so good, it looks too good to be true. It's like the hot woman that everybody wants, right? And that's crypto. Problem, of course, is quantum computing, which is just as hot right now, but not to the masses. The fact that the masses only know about crypto, but if you were to ask most of them about quantum computing, they probably have no idea. And that's actually the issue for crypto, is quantum computing could actually crack all the codes to everything and make it to where that whole entire system would not work anymore, and actually cheat that system and pull coins from some people, and the blockchain would completely be not that encrypted and not even that great. So I feel like we're going to see a lot of disruptions in that market, because the computing is the one thing through all these transits over the last 70 years that continues to keep going quantum, literally. And so I feel like that's going to be an issue. And I think that people have to look at what's going to happen with the trade issues, because with Uranus here at the end of Taurus, we're going to see Venus and Uranus make a conjunction this year at 29 Taurus. And then Uranus ingresses into Gemini. Venus will be at like 2 degrees. And then in 2026, the same thing happens at the exact same way. Uranus will have Venus conjunct it one more time in Taurus. Venus will be 2 degrees and Uranus ingresses into Taurus or into Gemini. Again, the exact same thing. And so it feels like there's going to be this, it looks like this is going to be the way it is. And there's going to be a hard turn in a different direction from what if everything from China doesn't show up on our shores anymore? So people might have a lot of money in crypto, but what are you going to buy? I think that that's going to be the issue, is like, what is you might be able to be rich, but rich isn't going to be the new thing. It's going to be if your availability, who you know, and the ability to create things. I also think of the end of Neptune and Pisces into Aries during the Civil War. It's like the gold in California wasn't the big thing. It was Levi jeans. People just like, oh, I need jeans, right? So I feel like it becomes this kind of energy of like, who's able to create the things that people actually need? And then people are trying to be rich right now, but they don't even realize the things to be rich for. It's what, are you going to go buy a bunch of things that you can't get anymore unless you kind of already at this upper echelon? And I do feel like this upper echelon is going to be a new internet, like Web 3 or 4. Who gets access? Who has the actual computer and the technology and the right processors? And especially we're now in a whole new, just not AI itself, but the hardware to create AI and to access it processor wise. You have to be on a new ARM system. And even you've seen Apple go that direction. You've seen AMD, and you see Intel dying and almost about to go out of business. And so you see this complete, like, if you don't understand computing, you're going to be lost, including with the robotics you brought about. I mean, that's where they're going to start taking people, because all these jobs aren't going to be done, but there's going to be like, hey, you have a guaranteed 1.5 years here to help us build the robots. But after that,
right. So then the big question is, what do you do with the people? Because if you don't need human capital and human labor, and this Pluto and Capricorn phase for since 2009, which is really, for me, the kind of the last gasps of this system of human capital that we've been involved in for thousands of years. What do you do with sort of the leftover humans that used to do the things that needed to be done? And now you have this doppelganger, right? The other, through Uranus and Gemini, and would be more than happy to take over your job. Like, so that's the question. What becomes to the human in Pluto and Aquarius in this version of Aquarius? And I'll just throw that out to you guys.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to comment, though, real quick on the velocity of change, because that's really intriguing to me, and sort of how to face it and what to do. And what I've been reading lately is that the velocity of change actually increases at the end of an age and at the end of an empire as well. And there's a few different examples of this actually being the case. So even the end of a great age, like the Kali Yuga or something like that, I've heard that the velocity of change just increases and increases and increases, right? It's a real phenomenon. It picks up speed, basically. And one of the fun little examples that I came across that kind of acknowledges this is the Roman Empire and their chariot games, of all things. I was looking at the chariot symbolism for the chariot card, right? And I thought it was really interesting to learn that chariot games in the Roman Empire were designated for specific holidays, specific dates. There was like a ritualistic aspect to it and everything else. And that people loved them, obviously. But as the empire got bloated and corrupt and everything else, the chariot game schedule increased and increased and increased with velocity and how often they were put on. And then towards the end of the empire, as things were about to crumble, there were chariot games like all the time. You can indulge in chariot games like, I think like every day sort of thing. And it kind of just reminds me of entertainment and how we kind of are today. People used to have a radio show that they liked or a play that they would go see or something along these lines, right? And you would indulge in entertainment like this occasionally. And then at some point, everyone got television, but there was only so many channels, so many shows. And then people eventually got cable. And then now we have TikTok, and now we have all these different things, right? And so you can literally indulge in entertainment all day long, perpetually, seemingly forever, right? And so this is an example, in my opinion, of this velocity sort of picking up. And what I've read too is that at the end of an age, that as this velocity increases of change, what happens is people start prioritizing quantity over quality. That quality completely goes away, and things that are quantifiable, measurable, scientific, in many ways, that starts taking over people's everything, So people start becoming way more indulgent, and the thing that they tend to care about, I think it kind of boils down to money too, you know, and money is all about the quantifiability of everything, right? Everything is worth something. You can buy somebody, you know, and you can buy anything and everything. Now everything in nature has a value to it. How much is this tree worth? How much is that rock worth? How much is this water worth? How much is that animal worth? Things like that, right? So in my opinion, personally, symbolically, I'm thinking of this change not unlike a wheel that's perpetually spinning. That's maybe spinning faster and faster and faster. And there's a whole philosophy about getting to the center of your wheel, which is the hub of the wheel, which is the axle of the wheel, which is known as the changeless center. So that's my advice. How do you deal with the velocity of change? You get to the middle of the wheel, you get to this symbolic center, and you become the unmoved mover. You become immutable, basically. And so this is what all the masters teach, basically. No matter how chaotic the world gets around them, you can be centered, you can be stationary, and you can almost see this madness kind of unfold around you if you're choosing to kind of go to your sacred center, follow your true north, your true authenticity, things like that. So that's what I wanted to mention. It looks like we lost Robert.
Yeah. I'll jump in here. Just to add to that, I mean, you know, I think, you know, if you break down society into some of the core pillars like healthcare, education, you know, et cetera, it's like the state that we're in, I think, is that a lot of people in the U.S. are in, can be pretty dire, because you think about it, like the you know, the ticket to the American dream, and for a lot of people, is costly. You think about the debt people go into through college or otherwise, and then you also think about how, to your point, Mario, the lifestyle of just modern day brings people to like their physical demise. I mean, I was on a flight to San Diego a couple of days ago, and I just like, I like everyone on the flight just looked so unhealthy to me. Like, honestly, I was just like, I don't even know like how some of these people were able to like get around. Like, it was so like strange to me. It was like all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, wow, like, you know, we wouldn't even really be able to like stand up to much, because like I think it matters like what the individual in a society, like what they are like, you know, because they do reflect like the nation. And it's like, you know, it's right. I'm not even like just picking on the US here, but it's like, you know, is the mind of the average person in that society sound? Like, is the body healthy? Like, we're looking at all these markers of like success, and it's like increasingly fleeting. And it's like, you know, as a wealthy nation, we can spend our way into a victory in a war. But at a certain point, when we get the Aries stellium in 2026, like we might get wrapped up in a war that's like way beyond the scale that we're used to, where we do have to like survive in different ways. And like when we get all this Aries energy, I feel like at some point the actual like state of the populace like matters a lot, you know? And so like I keep thinking about it like what you're saying, like minimize distractions, you know, let's promote good health. I mean, although it doesn't get promoted at all, but it's like, you know, the actual, when I think about the US, I'm like, okay, like we still have like a high GDP per capita, but then I also think about, again, like the state of just like people I see out there in the world, and I'm like, oh my God, like, you know, are we paper giants? Like, it just, like, right. That's what keeps me up at night, honestly, is like, are we even like, would we be able to respond to like a true emergency situation in this country?
Right. I know. Yeah. Great points, man. I'm right there with you. I'm acknowledging the same things over here. In my opinion, I don't know if I said this when I was talking about being centered and still and everything, but I think you really get there by being present, having the presence of mind, being present, appreciating the present moment, the present day, you know, the journey through, you know, what you're going through, right? Instead of being really preoccupied about the future or the past, being in the present moment, I think really can do wonders for a lot of people. It's when you're going to make your best decisions as well.
I had to cut out there because dude, you were just, it was gold. I was like, my God, Mario is like really getting to this. And I was so pissed off that I couldn't hear it. So I had to relocate, but I loved where you were going and this idea of everything speeding up, right? Like the Roman games, you know, everything is just hitting this like peak velocity. And do you think that this is predominant amongst most cultures that reach a certain place, that everything reaches this maximal kind of acceleration, and then something happens, either there's collapse or something new? Like, have you tracked this across various cultures?
You know what? Kind of. And it's actually interesting you bring that specific thing up because some people say a similar thing about Atlantis. That technology kind of got out of hand. The occultists or magicians developed technology that was too advanced and they didn't know how to really utilize it appropriately. And so I just think that's an interesting sort of thread. So I think that there are many examples out there that you could probably look at with this. And the crash of a currency kind of relates to this as well. What happens when a currency crashes, right? Look how much it takes to buy a loaf of bread. That's always the classic example, right? Look how much the quantity of exchange completely goes through the roof or whatever. And so I don't know. That's a great question. I'd actually like to follow up and do maybe more research on that specifically. But it seems as though this is definitely a pattern.
Well, how many sacrifices would the Mayans have? Right. I mean, by the time they got to the end of their Mayan golden era, their sacrifices were much more frequent than they were at any other given point in time. So this idea of frequency and collapse, I think, kind of goes hand in hand. Wow, that was a really interesting insight. LA, what do you think about that? Do you have anything you want to add to that idea?
Yeah, I love where Mario was going because it is a critical mass. I actually feel it's the same thing that we're hearing from Sam Altman about singularity with AI. It's this interesting moment that Nostradamus also talked about in his big prophecies that he shows in the astrology. Like it does hit these points to where everything, and if you look at where we've been at with all these big, it was called conjunctional astrology back in the 1300s. That's what predicted the Black Plague to the Pope. Just from 2020 just to now, these massive planetary conjunctions and all the planets on one side of the whole zodiac, right? It is a critical mass moment of every level, financial, societal, especially just even these outer planets that are finally going to be shifting into this air and fire dynamic. It does kind of feel like not Mad Max, but it does feel like you do have to be more extroverted. You do have to kind of take advantage of the moments that are going to be happening. And I think there's been this kind of like everything always works and everything's always, and we kind of think life always will look the same. But what always happens is life evolves and it changes, and we're coming into that huge evolutionary moment right now. And it does feel like all things are interconnected that are all going to affect one another at the same time. And that's usually what happens in history. And it definitely is looking like what's coming up here with these eclipses that are going to start this year. I mean, this whole Mars retrograde coming into a Venus retrograde. This North Node is going to see Neptune, Saturn, Venus, Mercury. It's going to be wild, and then move everything into this new space. And the Jupiter Saturn's going to happen again, but in cardinal signs at the very beginning of them. And so it does feel like it's all going to hit this huge kind of like peak moment here in this first part of 2025. And then there's this whole other part of watching everything come back in to Pisces and back into Taurus with Uranus, where it's like it then gets all pulled away. It's almost like we get to like see some sort of horizon, and then it's like, nope, come back. And so it does feel very much like an erosion of things. We already see the population is declining in the world. We don't see, especially in the Western countries, we don't see this, explosion of babies anymore. It's the most opposite of the Pluto Leo generation, right? Pluto Aquarius now is the opposite. It's the opposite of the baby boom. So you're also seeing women naturally, whether it's the plastics that are in everybody now, they're finding plastics in every woman's placenta. I mean, we're talking about this really hard lesson. I think humanity is going to learn about what going to critical mass is, but I think it's part of the evolution. And I also think it's kind of what's going to bring us to the next version of what humanity is. It does feel like if Darwin was correct, which I don't know if he was, but I like the model, because if we can look at Homo sapien, it does feel like we're moving into the new version of that. And with that comes the critical mass of that Homo sapien, which has plastics in it, which is surrounded in a world of electromagnetic frequencies, technologies, people who have and don't have. So I don't believe the notion of this like golden age that, and you all know I love Trump and I love what's happened, but I anybody selling you that it's a golden age and everybody's going to get it, that just doesn't happen, right? Like you're going to have to know the right people, you're going to have to be on the right things, and there's going to be the has and the has nots, and you know, I do feel like this, what Mario's brought up is what has been coming into this moment. There's so much that's been hidden, right? Like the job numbers were all a lie through the Biden administration, right? Yep. So there's actually more jobs. It just came out. It was more jobs that the government employed over the last 4 years than in the private sector. Right. The other one was massive. They kept saying that there was all these manufacturing jobs. There was only 18,000 manufacturing jobs in the last 4 years. Yep. That's it. 18,000.
Yeah, and those manufacturing jobs were started by government programs in like the Midwest, places like Ohio and Indiana, where they started to work on, you know, solar, right? Those were all government funded projects, not all of them, but a lot of them were. So even to your point, the manufacturing had the government behind it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually insane to me because I like, then you just take the health, right? Like through the pandemic, like more people, they don't even they record it, but they don't tell you anymore. Like the highest number of COVID cases supposedly are right now. The highest number of flus, the highest numbers of this, everything's at the peak out level. But now it's like, let's not talk about anything that's happening, or the air in LA, like Evan was talking about earlier. Let's not talk about that. It's the same kind of air quality as if you were on ground zero in New York City right now.
Right.
Like, we are at this place to where there's just too much now that nobody wants to talk about it or deal with it or look at it and just kind of be very naive about it. And just people don't want to deal with things. And I think that's kind of this peak out in Pisces, which unfortunately the end of Pisces is the most sloppiest place. It does bring a spiritual awakening in a great way. And I think we're going to have to go through it, but it's not going to be the purpley flower. And, you know, I don't think Saint Germain's coming down with Jesus to kind of like, you know, save the world in the way that we think. We have to find that as a collective in ourselves. And we have to really, with Pluto and Aquarius, I feel like all start to like help each other out, but you also have to know how to do your own stuff too, which is very Aries coming in. So I do feel like it's almost like it's an overwhelm on the society, an overwhelm on the system, an overwhelm, and that's a singularity moment in itself if you think about it. So
yeah, I was going to add in here. I think we're in for a fairly rough transition from Pisces to Aries here. It almost feels like number one, I almost feel like as a society we have like adrenal fatigue over like stressful events, you know, and it's like this weird dichotomy where we live in a very comfortable society, relatively speaking, but like comfortability creates a high exposure to the known and a low exposure to the unknown. And I think that the low exposure to the unknown in our daily lives makes us vulnerable to like fear mongering in mass media and so on. And so it's like that vulnerability has been hacked. And it's like every day we're seeing these news stories that make us like kind of feel a little bit afraid, but we're powerless to do anything about it. But now we're about to transition to this dream box or this nightmare box, whatever it is, where again, we're being exposed to like all these stimuli in the news of like, okay, all these things are collapsing or there's all these dangers out there that we can't do anything about. But then shifting into like, we're almost being like thrust into the elements next year, right? And like when all these planets go into Aries, Neptune, Saturn, Mars, Chiron's still there, you know, eventually it's going to become a lot more raw and a lot more visceral. And it's like, it's almost like, what happens when the emergency is actually brought to fruition and we have to react to it, you know? Because right now I feel like people are just kind of cynical and like, again, fatigued. It's like, oh God, okay, this social media app is going away, whatever. And like, eventually people just don't even care. Like, you know, oh, this, like for people who are like terrified of Trump or whatever, like, oh, this new administration is coming in. Like even the people who are like terrified of Trump, they're probably at a certain point just like throwing their hands up, like whatever, it's just like another day. Or people who, like whatever people's fears are, it's like they're all kind of tapped out at this point. And to Mario's point earlier, it's like, what are the options? We either excessively indulge or we just like do nothing. So it's like, I'm really curious to see like what that fire air transition looks like after we've been in this Neptunian, Piscean, again, like just box that's almost like this false reality for like 15 years, but somehow still drained, right? Like somehow still tired, even if we're just sitting on our couch all day. So, that transition to me feels, very, very tenuous.
Yeah, there was a point.
Say one stupid little thing. I was going to say it feels like in when you're in Pulp Fiction, when do they just straight put the adrenaline inside of her and she wakes up because the sun's been stoned, the universe has been stoned for 15 years with Neptune and Pisces, and this Saturn Neptune coming into Aries is an adrenaline shot to the heart. Like So.
Yeah.
But yeah, the question is, do people have any adrenaline left? Because I think that I used to talk about false flag fatigue, where we'd have all these events kind of rolled out, under Neptune and Pisces. This stuff really picked up, right? The school shootings and for a while there, it was like we were having one a month. And then people would be, in this cycle where they would be, pretty much asked to emote on demand, right? Oh, we just had this major thing, and now we've got to feel for whatever this major thing is. And these people who we don't even really know, right? It's a complete abstraction, but somehow they're supposed to be connected to us through like the brotherhood and the sisterhood of man, some kind of universal connection. And so therefore, we have to feel something, and therefore we have to pray. Prayer is out. And it feels like, we've just reached the end of that. Like nobody has anything left to give in that area. And if they do, they're just going through the motions. I can tell you that right now. It's just some kind of, rote sort of behavior pattern that is in the Skinner box, which is what you're talking about, Evan. And so the shot to the heart, that's great if there's any adrenaline left. But I'm not sure how much adrenaline people still have, because people have just been running on their adrenaline, just like they've been running on their credit cards. And so this gets us into this moment, right, where we're hitting this Aquarian place. And how desperate are people for change? And what will they accept as a result of these new programs, theoretically, that can be ushered in? Because they may not have any choice, or to your point, Evan, they throw their hands up in the air. It's like, well, I'm just dog-ass tired. Okay, tell me what to do. Like, so where are we with that? What are people willing to accept, and what kind of energy do we have left? And will this shift into Aries motivate us more? Because it's going to be an interesting time with Saturn and Neptune. So Mario, I'll throw that back to you and we'll work around again.
Gotcha. I wanted to comment as you were talking. I was thinking about the weaponization of the signs, and how I love astrology. I love the symbolism associated with each sign, everything else. And one of the things I've been putting together for a good while now, actually, and at some point I'm going to produce, a presentation series or something about this, but how each sign has been weaponized, the symbolic value of each sign being weaponized, right? And I think arguably you can say that with Aquarius, there's a number of things that you can kind of pull out with this. But the weaponization of the community and wanting to belong to a community. And some people have referred to this as communitarianism, basically. And it's just really interesting how the government and different institutions kind of use the word community, and how it's kind of like put in our face, and it's always about the community. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's actually at the expense of the individual. And, I'm more about individuation. And I personally don't have a concept where everybody sort of like, wakes up or something along those lines. I think it's more of an individual sort of thing. There, at one point in time, people are going to be going to sleep. Other people are going to be waking up. I'm not waiting for the masses to wake up personally. You kind of have to just take care of your own affairs and your own business and everything else, right? But just this idea of community and how that seems to be the priority, not the individual. So if you don't have the same idea as the rest of the community, then you're exiled, you're blackballed, you're no longer part of that community, right? And so I just wanted to mention that, based off of some of the things that everyone's basically saying, right? And I think Aquarius, you could make the case that the weaponization of that is partly, sort of the shadow of Aquarius, maybe in a way. But I'm sorry, what was your main question that before?
Well, it was really, I mean, it gets back to this fatigue, and how do we keep going in the midst of everything that's been taxing our system, and not just the events, but the demand that we be a certain way, or if there's some, like, we just had this thing happen in New Orleans. Like, who the fuck knows what happened in New Orleans, right? It's another level of abstraction. We know that some guy brought a truck there and went into Bourbon Street and rammed some people, and then the next thing I know, they're telling people in these football stadiums across the United States, during the college games and the NFL games, and now let's have a moment of silence for the victims of New Orleans. And we don't even know completely like what happened or who they are, but on demand, on command, a group of people in a football stadium all have to stand up at the same time and then somehow like square this event inside of their head, inside of their heart, project into, well, gee, if my sister was there or my daughter was there, boy, I'd feel real bad about that, right? Because people have to have some kind of basis for which to attach their emotions to. But again, it's this level of abstraction that's being enacted on a group level, like as a ritual, really. And then it's like, well, okay, well, again, what do we have left? It's yeah.
I think what we have left, I mean, just, don't underestimate the power of the human spirit. And I think that a lot of people are bored. I think they're bored. I think they're tired of the same old. I think that there's almost too much information, too much going on social media and too much to entertain you and things like that. But it's not speaking to your spirit, right? And right. So it's, in fact, I would say entertainment, avoidance, addiction, distraction. We live in the golden age of distraction, in my opinion, And so what is that distraction away from? Knowledge of self, right? And so I think if people were to orient themselves to their true north, find some sort of real orientation, I think there's probably like almost like an infinite amount of energy that can kind of be untapped, in a way. And so that's just kind of my personal opinion. It's like it makes a lot of sense that people would be lethargic and bored and tired and all these other things. Because look at what they're consuming, look at what their life is like, what they do on the daily, their philosophy on things and everything else. But I think if there was that shift and people kind of found their center that way, I think people could do all sorts of amazing things. Personally,
I see some heads nodding in agreement in SoCal there.
Yeah, I was gonna add, and Mario, you're on the ball. I'm not surprised. You were at Robert's retreat also. Yeah, I mean, as you're talking about all of this, I'm also kind of just channeling some stuff, and like, I just want to ask this question of like, why observe something that that we're powerless to fix, right? Like, what happens when we give our energy to a stressful situation, like whether it's New Orleans, what happened in New Orleans or otherwise? It's like you're moody, you become drained. And then what do you do to de-stress? You watch porn or something like that, or you watch a story about how some OnlyFans girl banged 1,000 guys. So it's like, or you hear a story about, oh, this guy manifested 10 million followers on TikTok in 24 hours. It's like only shock value really comes to the surface now because we're kind of desensitized to everything. So like, what is the path to empowerment at this point? Is it time to just kind of like reset and just like Mario, kind of like we said earlier, kind of like go inward and find your inner center, or find your true north? Because I feel like again, it's like we are all, I feel like, kind of giving, we're always tempted to give our energy to the wrong things.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. We're giving away our energy.
So the true north astrologically now is Pisces, right? It's the true node. Like if we are going to align in that regard, then for me it's a retreat from the world in a lot of ways. Like Pisces is otherworldly. We're not engaging. We have Mars retrograde in Cancer that is clearly a pulling away from the world energetically. You know, there's this saying, when fishermen can't go to sea, they mend their nets. So what does it look like here as we go deeper into the nodal experience of Pisces? Is this a strategy to go deeper and to turn away from the events of the world? What do you say?
Well, I mean, I think that whenever you're dealing with the fatigue of Pisces, it's to surrender, right? So the number one thing is to allow things to happen. Let it go through you, which I think we're in a society with the distractions that's been talked about. It's created that guard that people have, and that's very Aries anyway, that we just had the North Node in Aries. We had that total solar eclipse conjunct Chiron in 2024. It does feel like this end of the old idea of ego, which it's always having an expectation. So with the North Node now in Pisces, that's going to have Neptune being the ruler, which we have to remember especially after Saturn left Aquarius, and it's been in Pisces these last 2 years. Whenever you go into like dispositing planets and the hierarchy of them, Neptune has been the planet in its home sign ruling. So this has been a long time where it's all now pointing at Neptune again. North Node's dispositing Neptune. Neptune's in its own sign. Saturn's dispositing to Neptune, right? So it gets to this position of like, one, we have to be easy on ourselves, and we can't expect other people, because one of the things that South Node Virgo can be very like, you were supposed to do it this way. You were praying for me, but I could feel you weren't really into it. Like you brought up prayer earlier, how everybody kind of feels numb, I would call it in this space, right? It's because we're all just like overloaded a lot of stuff, and we have to surrender. So I think the number one thing we're going to see is you're going to have to find a layer of compassion that you've never had to find before. The best friend that you've gone through maybe a tragedy, or you went through something, and have to be okay that they weren't in the way that you expected them to be there. And you have to forgive yourself, you have to forgive them. And so a lot of this is going to be about allowing things to be and not being so surprised, because it is Pluto and Aquarius. I think we're going to have to actually do it all over again, where we try to do groups again, meeting with friends, doing groups, having talks, because it feels like we all kind of like feel like maybe it just didn't click maybe the way we all wanted to with our spiritual groups, and to have these bigger conversations in person. But I feel that this Aquarian Pluto now is saying, no, you have to, even if it's not about showing how big it is, because I think that was so Capricorn. Like it reminds me of the founding fathers. There was only a select few of them, like 8 or 9 of them, that were Masons. The rest weren't, but the ones that made their impact, and we have the statues of, became first president, all that stuff, all Masons, laid the first, part of the Capitol building. And so there has to be this place where we exchange these ideas in person, to exchange energy without expectation about how people should be towards us. We have to, the highest part of Pisces is true compassion and true allowance. And that's difficult, I think, for people, because there's such a high expectation rate. And there's also this wanting to prove people's, value with Uranus that's been here in Taurus, Chiron and Aries. I mean, we've been in the setup of like, you want to watch an ego death of the collective in every individual on the planet. It's happening. And that makes it, I think, harder on that place where people feel tired, because you're not going to pick yourself up in that way. I like how Mario brought up, don't ever, look at the human spirit as ever getting knocked down and never getting up, because it will fully get up. It's just going to be a new way of getting up. I think it's going to be through not having so much expectation of what's delivered to us by people, by governments, by anything, or what your job should do for you, or what these people should do for you. But allowing people to be themselves, allowing you, and then when shock stuff happens, you shouldn't be surprised. It's kind of seeing the wonder in all of it. And I think that's going to be the best way to get through this, is like hey, there's no reason to be so shocked anymore. I mean, we also live in a world where death anxiety and death culture through the 2020 bullshit pandemic lie created death anxiety to the max, right? To have people actually mask up and lock themselves down. So you have to also we have to come back to a society where we accept that death happens. We all have one thing in common. We're all going to die. Besides that, we all have a North Node at 0 Aries in our draconic charts. I mean, like that's like we have to get to that. And Pisces, even though maybe it's not about death, it's the 12th house. It's everything that's behind the curtain. And I know that can be something that's really a hard place to go, but it's really about like that internal work that you do. And I feel like this is also where like Eckhart Tolle is going to be where his work does his best, right? Truly allowing things to be in the moment, getting yourself out of distractions, like paying attention to the tree, seeing the wonder in these little things. I feel like, you know, it gets us back to how to feel the identity that we want to have of getting back up or feeling strong. But it's not about, oh, look at what we just did. Look at how that is not going to get you anything. And so I think we have to get out of that Chiron in Aries. This is going to be interesting too. This year it comes pretty far close, but it's next year it ingresses into Taurus for the first time. And so it's also going to be Chiron's, you know, discovery coming back up because it was in Taurus when it was discovered in 77. So we're finally going to get ready in this next year. This is the last full year of us being in a, let's see what Chiron's full transit's been about, right? Like the beginning of Taurus is next year and starting to have the understanding astrologically as astrologers, like what a Chiron, you know, full transit's been about. And I feel like Chiron and even these other planets that we've discovered over the last 300 years, these outer planets, we're really going to understand them better through this year of watching these ingresses happen. And that means that some other entity is going to be found, right? Whether that's a planet X or whether it's new forms of different comets in our own solar system or something, we're going to go, something can be in a positive way of putting us in a new place, which would be discovery. And that's the other part of Neptune. And whenever you have Pluto conjuncture Neptune is your moment of awakening. And sometimes that's through drugs, sometimes that's just through some spiritual person in your life. But what's weirder is the society is having those conjunctions later. So we see that about society with if you watch Pluto generations, like these younger Gen Z kids are having their Pluto transit to their natal Neptunes in their mid to late 20s now. Right. Like me or you, like I had that shit at 20 years old that I fucking was like, you know, so it makes it weirder now because the older you are, the more experience you had young. The younger you are, you're going to have your experiences way later than the last 4 generations.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. You know, the other thing about the true node in Pisces, we have the south node in Virgo, and Virgo wants to fix everything, right? Virgo has a plan, and it's based on some form of analysis or some form of accumulation of data. And in the south node position, it's not as strong, right? It doesn't mean that you can't figure out how to stay healthy, or you can't figure out how to take care of yourself and use whatever available means, usually naturally, to do that. But it's taking a backseat to Pisces. And so I feel like, you know, and even me coming from a very late Virgo space, like there's a tendency in a lot of our lives to help other people and to say, okay, well, you know, I have a good idea for you, or I have a plan for you, or, you know, I think inherently a lot of us do that. But with the true node in Pisces, it's really very different. And I think a lot of it is allowing for people to make their own mistakes and to mess up and to figure things out on their own and come to their own kind of emotional understanding or gnosis without having like a user's manual or somebody around to, pull them out of the fire or fix it. And it feels like that there's just going to be more of that in the air. And so there's also kind of somebody brought up surrender in the chat, surrender and allowing people to just kind of show up. And if they're messy, they're messy, or if they're divine, they're divine, right? Mara, you're nodding your head there. It sounds like you have a sense of this.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I was going to say, actually, and it's just lining up with what I was thinking about, but, the Aquarian nature, right? Kind of being more of a humanitarian sort of person and appreciating maybe other people's like eccentric nature and things like that, being very accepting of people and whatnot. And just one sort of glimmer of hope I just want to put out there with everything is that, I'm a big tarot guy. That's kind of like my foundation. I do tarot readings for people and things like that. And so the tarot really opened me up to astrology and mythology and numerology and all sorts of other things. And one of the things that I think is kind of an accurate way of viewing the cards is that when you have a card that corresponds with a sign, you are basically seeing an expression of that sign, pretty much, right? And so when it comes to Aquarius, the sign is, when it comes to Aquarius, the card that corresponds with it is the star card of all the cards. And a lot of people say that this is one of the more beautiful, hopeful kind of cards, in the whole entire major arcana, right? And so it generally depicts a nude woman. She has two urns. She's pouring water. She's actually preparing a ritual bath, in my opinion. That's what she's doing. And she's underneath the stars, and there's a central star above her. And there's different opinions about what star this star is. According to my research and what I've decoded and looked into, it can be none other than the North Star itself, right? It's the central star in the heavens that even all of the stars in the zodiac circumambulate around. All of the stars go counterclockwise around the pole star. So symbolically, it is the hub of the wheel, right? That is the wheel of heaven. And so if we're moving into and I know people have different opinions about this. I think I asked you guys actually when I saw you in Texas, the age of Aquarius, where are we, with all of that? If we're entering into an age of Aquarius, I actually wonder if we're entering into what I refer to as a polar age, that people are going to be swinging back from the external to the internal, and that central star is symbolic of that, again, being the center of the wheel of heaven and everything else. So some of the, just what you said there, I was nodding because I was just thinking about the Aquarian side of that and everything else. And it makes me wonder if we are actually kind of going back to something along these lines, that sort of external validations and distractions and everything else, if that's actually going to fall away and people are going to start slowly going back to, the internal landscape and prioritizing that and their relationship with spirit and everything else. And also too, kind of like what, David was saying earlier, with a golden age or whatever, everything happens in steps. Like the older I get and the more I study and everything else, everything always happens in steps. There are, of course, great big events where something does come down. I'm thinking of like the Tower card, as an example, right? But for the most part, everything symbolically, it's like steps downward, the steps of a collapse, but then also the steps towards a golden age. It isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. It's a gradient, basically, a step-by-step sort of thing. It's like alchemical, basically, right?
Yeah.
So the process of alchemy is there's a number of steps. You don't just turn, lead into gold, in just one step, right?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Evan, do you have anything to add to this, or can we jump off into another topic?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. So tomorrow is the inauguration, and it's quite interesting in that it's happening, of course, at 0 Aquarius on the sun, and then Pluto's at 1 Aquarius. And David and I have talked about this in previous get-togethers here on YouTube, and that when Trump was elected in 2016, Mars was in Capricorn on the day of the election, and then the day after Mars was at 0 Aquarius. And so he takes over, and there is a revolutionary tumult in the air. And it feels very similar in some ways with tomorrow's events. First of all, we're not going to have any of I don't think Obama's going to be there. I don't think Biden's going to be there. I'm not sure how many people, former presidents, are going to be at this inauguration. It's going to be inside instead of outside. So this is a very, very different kind of initiation. It's a very different kind of ritual, a very different kind of welcoming of a president. So what I want to do is I want to bring up this chart that we have here for tomorrow. And I'd like to kind of dive into it and sort of peel some layers back with it, because I think it's actually a really significant chart. So I'm going to bring it up here. And this is what we're looking at for tomorrow at 12 noon, Washington, D.C. This is the chart of the inauguration. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. And I think what's really interesting, and I'm going to throw this out here to you guys and let you run with it a bit. If you look at this chart, Pluto is actually 1 degree ahead of the sun. And to me, this is the table center, right? Like Pluto is dominant here. And whoever is occupying this seat, and we'll say in this instance that the sun represents Trump, right? Because he's the one that's being inaugurated. But it's not just Trump. It's, you know, it's the milieu, it's the energy, it's this very transformational moment in time. Pluto has the sway here. And what I thought was interesting about this too, is that they're together, right? But the sun is ruled by Leo. So it's actually in detriment here, right? The sun is in detriment in Aquarius. And so we have these very interesting sort of paradoxical energies that are taking place. And it's also happening on the 20th. And when Mario comes back in, I'd love for him to talk about this idea of the Aeon in the judgment card, which is related to this day on the 20th, which is the end of one age and the beginning of another age, whether it's a new age or not, right? Because it's a lot of loaded language. But this feels fated to me. And David, you have talked about how you think that Trump is a temporary candidate, and I'm in agreement with you on that. Like, he's a temporary president. And I'm wondering how much this Pluto conjunction and this kind of fated quality with Pluto in front of the sun plays a role in this, and also not taking this away from Trump, you know, but how this impacts us, like here in this country. And you may say, well, that's great for the United States, but we're in a domino effect here. And when we get into Aquarius, you know, we're all in it together in one iteration or another. So I want to throw this chart out here. And Evan, why don't you dig in and just, you know, you don't have to start with Sun Pluto. You can if you want, but just dig in and let's spend some time with this.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I mean, I definitely want to start with the Sun Pluto conjunction in Aquarius. I feel like that can really transform Trump's reputation. It can signal that his reputation can just like change overnight with the flip of a switch, you know. And I do think that the TikTok ban has a big role to play here, because, you know, the sort of like language from TikTok was like, well, thanks to President Trump, we can now return this platform to all of you. Again, with TikTok even being Aquarian and being like that bringer of light or information or water or whatever it is, like that's how it's kind of seen. And, you know, we are about to enter this, again, like you said, Robert, an initiation of something, but like it's an era where at the flip of a switch, like the masses can either turn in your favor or against you. And so I do think that Trump is taking on this he's already been larger than life in a lot of ways, but now I think he's taking on this persona that is even less predictable than it has been before. But I do think the Sun Pluto conjunction can also, of course, indicate that, hey, this is an executive, this is a leader who maybe doesn't have a lot of time left, or suddenly there is a plutonic moment in that literal sense. But when I was looking at his transits the other day, I feel like his Uranus return looks like so fascinating to me, like to a point where I feel like he's still in office in 2030. Because his Uranus return is in 2030, and at that time, it's like Saturn and Mars meeting up on his midheaven. I mean, maybe that's the point where he's like just no longer president during his like third term or something. But it's like, with Trump's chart, I feel like, ever since July 13th or whatever, like he's kind of maybe even created his own timeline anyways. But I guess like, but anyways, to kind of like bring this back home, I just think that Sun Pluto conjunction is showing that there's a lot of just sudden starts and stops for Trump, where like he's maybe beloved by this like cohort or this demographic that nobody expected him to be beloved by. And then just one quick thing to mention is that Mercury is opposing Mars pretty much and squaring Chiron. So if there was any situation where Trump was not to finish his term, I feel like it would have something to do with like an accident or something, like a vehicular accident. I mean, that's like to me the T-square right there, and even with the moon, I guess, creating a grand cross. That is not a T-square you want, at the initiation of anything. I mean, yeah,
The grand cross is very heavy.
Like this is something that people. Yeah. Well, I was just going to add, I mean, the Mars-Mercury opposition is something I feel like a lot of astrologers gloss over when they're looking at transits. But, I have Mars opposite Mercury in my own chart in Gemini and Sag. And like most people that I do readings for with something like that in their charts, like either were in a car accident or their parent was in a really bad car accident at some point, or they had like a traumatic head injury, or they, in my case, when I was like 4 years old, like willingly banging my head on the floor for some reason. But that T-square is actually something I was like calling out in my January predictions on YouTube. I was like saying how I could see someone like either using a vehicle, as sort of as an attack vehicle, which I said that like 2 days before New Orleans, but I still saw the transit here in like January 20th, 21st, 23rd, as that's when it's like really peaking. So it's like, I don't think like anyone would want that T-square, like I said, in their inauguration chart. So if Trump didn't finish his term, I think it has something to do with like I don't know if it's like a Princess Diana moment or something, but that T-square is really glaring.
So I've thrown this out there before. I wonder if Trump can even drive. So I'm serious. I mean, besides a golf cart, like if you think about Trump, he spent all of his time in New York, and he either took taxis or had a car service. Like, I've never seen Trump behind the wheel of a car, right? That doesn't mean that he can't drive, but I've often wondered, like, because, he's lived a very urban life where you really don't need a car in New York City. So if he's going to be in an accident, somebody else is going to be driving. I can assure you of that. That's an interesting take, Evan. David, what do you got here? Let's open this up to you.
Yeah, so one, the fact that it's the day prior to the Sun-Pluto conjunction that actually will start the Pluto-Aquarius transit, because you need the Sun to fully set it into motion. It does feel temporary because it's still kind of in this in-between stage where Pluto is out of Capricorn, but Pluto's ingress into Aquarius hasn't really had its own inauguration, and that inauguration is the day after Trump's inauguration. Two, if we see Venus and Saturn, Venus has slowed down. It was exactly in 2017. Venus was at the same place, right? So kind of weird. So if you want to use a good example, is Vine shut down the same time that TikTok just shut down the same Venus cycle? Chris Brennan had put that one out, so give credit to him. He had put that one out, but I think we all been thinking about, we're in the Venus cycle that 8 years ago was because we have Venus retrograde coming. But the Trump Venus Saturn conjunction in his known natal chart is very apparent, connected, of course, to his 10th house, of course, being Taurus midheaven. What's weird is when Venus retrogrades in March 1st, when it comes back into Pisces after being in Aries, it stations and sits with Saturn for 24 days. The amount of time.
That's a long time.
It's a long time to have Venus and Saturn together.
Yeah.
The amount of days that we're going to have all the planets direct in 2025 is about the same. This is not a year where there's a lot of forward, like all planets direct for months. It's about the same amount of days, and they're not consecutive. You know, there's like the 5 days after Mars stations direct, and Mars is not going to move, of course, in 5 days. It's a 5-day transit where Mars doesn't move. And then Venus stations direct or retrograde. And then when Venus retrogrades back, and it's all going to be in Pisces, that squares his lunar eclipse. We have to remember he is a lunar eclipse, baby. Right. So it's really interesting that we are starting to step into these eclipses. And the first eclipse that is of the Pisces Virgo nodal aspect is the lunar eclipse that's coming in Virgo. The solar eclipse will be in Aries. But if you look at his prenatal astrology, like his prenatal eclipses, he was not born with a prenatal lunar eclipse. He was born with 2 prenatal solar eclipses because he was born on a lunar eclipse. So it's the lunar eclipses that are the ones to watch for him, not the solar. He always needs to do solar stuff. Yeah. And so you mix the Venus-Saturn aspect, you mix all these very hard transits in Pisces to his chart, and then you mix the Sun-Pluto being the inauguration of the president before the inauguration of the Sun-Pluto transit for the next, 19 years. It feels like he's shifting I think Evan brings up a great point. It's almost like he's going to become, his reputation, everything's going to be like, just how TikTok kind of was, right? Like, oh God, it's gone. Oh wait, Trump's going to fix it. Oh wait, Trump's going to come in. We don't have to have, Biden and the secret people who really ran the government, and we're going to be back. And then it almost feels like, and then, what's going to happen next? I think it's interesting that Evan brought up the point about Mercury and the Mars stuff and the opposition, because that always means it's a Mars retrograde, right? Because whenever you see the Sun and Mercury and there's oppositions to Mars, it's during a Mars retrograde. The worst Mars retrograde you could have is in Cancer, okay? We still have the Pluto opposition that Mars has one more time to come, and that's all coming right after these major Venus-Saturn transits that are going to be for longer than we've seen, and the longest you could have. Plus with the North Node that'll be with them, which I think is really kind of interesting. But I want to say that with Trump too, it's like you have all these like really rare things happening. But the fact that the last time that Mars retrograded in Leo, came back into Cancer and made an opposition to Pluto in Aquarius, I had to go all the way back. It's been 3,910 years. It was during the 12th dynasty in Egypt. So what's interesting is that was the year of the changeover of who was the pharaoh.
Was it Akhenaten?
The transit started, and then by the end of the transit, which we're not at the end of it, so we get into May into June, is a new pharaoh comes in.
Right.
So it does feel like he's here to do something. What happened at the very beginning of the Venus transit when he became the president, it's not going to be, Comey anymore and Russia collusion. It does feel like more of the reality of like these weird scenarios of like, what's the collusion happening between all these world events? And then it was also about getting the tax cuts passed. So it does feel like it'll be about, trying to move forward these financial issues.
Right.
And then somehow, and actually to use Evan's point, like whether it's a car bomb, that'd be my opinion, or a drone strike, because I would say that drone we can add to car now. It's very, it's very Mercurial or Gemini now. So some sort of drone strike or some sort of car bomb or something like that. And every Leo rising at 29 degree or in the last 3 degrees, including myself, we all know we're going to die a violent death. Okay. Like that's in the astrology, thousands of years. Late Leo, you're going to die of either asphyxiation, some sort of violent death, or drowning in a crazy way, but usually it's a violent death, like a explosion or a death or a knife through whatever. It's not gonna be fun. Late Leo risings didn't choose to die in their bed. Okay, We didn't.
He also has
No.
Mars on his ascendant too, right? And so that adds another,
Yeah, exactly.
another layer to it. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This Mars retrograde is really interesting. You know, the last time Mars went retrograde from Leo to Cancer was 1978. And guess who the president was? Jimmy Carter. And so now we have this Mars retrograde in Cancer. And the last time we had it was when Carter was president. And what happens to Carter? Right? Passes away. So this Mars retrograde is really interesting, like as it connects to Carter and, you know, that presidency, which was not a great one, right? Like it's a really, you know, that's when a lot of the stuff with Russia starts to happen. You know, Carter boycotts the Olympics in 1980 in Moscow, and then they boycott the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles, and we've got the Olympics coming again in LA as well. So we're in this weird time loop with this Mars retrograde as well. I'm going to throw this out there. And I think, Mario, you would be a really good person to comment on this. My sense is that this incarnation of Trump's presidency is that Trump is going to be more like a Caesar than a president. He's already talked about annexing Greenland, right? He wants to acquire Canada. I mean, these are the types of moves that a Caesar would make. These are the types of moves that somebody who wants to consolidate power in a very particular kind of way would make. And I feel like this Sun-Pluto conjunction really speaks to that, right? This is somebody who's moving into an office with a great deal of power. That's how I see the Sun-Pluto conjunction, and a great deal of potential catastrophe as well with this Grand Cross. Mario, I want to throw this out to you. This idea, we haven't really dealt with a modern Caesar. You know, maybe Stalin sort of, you know, comes to mind, but Stalin kind of lacks in some ways the sophistication that Caesar might have had, and sort of the grandeur that Caesar might have had. We haven't really dealt with anybody like that for a long time. Maybe Napoleon might have been the last example. Do you think that based on, you know, what we're talking about here, and maybe historically and symbolically, that we are maybe not ready for a Caesar, but based on the end of some of these cycles that we're talking about, that this type of figure would emerge? Am I still on? Where did he go?
Stage.
Oh.
It looks like we lost him.
Yeah, there you go.
I will say it does kind of feel. Oh, he's there. Okay, cool.
Oh, no, go ahead. David, feel free. I was backstage.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, like, I'll just say this thing. It does feel very kind of Napoleon-like, right? Like, more than I think Caesar. That's more, I think, easier to kind of look at this republic after the whole French Revolution, that they kind of want to go back to having an emperor, but kind of feel different because it's not some sort of monarch, right? But I don't know. I feel like with Trump, you're right, with him trying to go after these things. I will say, because Michael Luton passed a couple of months ago, and in respect to him, you know, and he said it when I was at UAC in 2018 with the last parts of these Pluto transits in Capricorn. He goes, there are going to be people that want to rule the world. And that really stuck with me. And since he's passed, it kind of is interesting to see, like, what, you want to have Greenland now, and now you want Canada now? Although it's weird because the Canada situation all was because of the Revolutionary War, that during the Treaty of Paris with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, that was the deal that was negotiated with England to make sure that those 13 colonies stayed, that they were fighting for Canada. So it's weird that Benjamin Franklin's wish of having Canada is something that Trump's trying to reemerge with, because the decision was made that no, we're going to take that. And they didn't even know how far it went up back then. But they were like, no, we're going to cut it off. That end of that 13th top colony where Maine is, that's it. And and that's where they ended up moving a lot of their troops, and they moved a lot of people. So it's weird that that's all coming back up in the same transit. Although I don't think we're going to see it this year. That's something that's up in the next 3 years, 2 years. So it is kind of interesting, but I'd love to hear Mario's opinion about this stuff.
Yeah, no, Robert, it's a great topic, great question. And I can't think of Caesar without thinking of the assassination, right? And so the killing of the king ritual is always in the back pocket, in my opinion. And the killing of the king, the beheading of a king, symbolically, this is like an old arc. It's an old story. It's almost embedded into the nature of what it means to be a king or a leader as well. There's an aspect to being a lord or an emperor or a king that implies sacrifice just with what you're doing and all of that. So it's really interesting. Caesar was killed during Aries season. And so is Christ, right? Because Christ is the sacrificial lamb. This is where a lot of Aries symbolism overlaps with Christian symbolism, him being that sacrificial lamb. And so I think that is interesting, and that's what I've been thinking about just personally, is if they're setting him up for something along these lines, whether it's actually something that will happen or it's just smoke and mirrors, Hollywood sort of stuff, right? The trauma for a lot of people is largely just going to be the same, and obviously there's going to be people who are going to celebrate that and people who are going to mourn that. And so I can definitely see that happening. And then also too, as you were talking about it, that is like part of the mythology of a leader as well, just like Christ being killed. And then being killed is what actually takes their mythology to that next level. That really, it becomes godlike, at that point, right? And so it's like the signs are definitely sort of there on a culture creation sort of level that it does make me wonder what's going to happen over the next 4 years, in that regard, right? And then we also clearly we went through a whole situation with that potentially being the case, but it makes me wonder if they're actually going to like really finalize that and drive it home. And they're kind of with the whole ear gunshot thing, if they were preluding to something, predictive programming, or kind of putting out little metaphors for what's to come or whatnot. So I definitely think that's within the realm of possibility. So that would not surprise me in the slightest at all.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Kill King ritual, because I think it was either today or yesterday that Trump said he's going to release all the JFK files. Did you guys hear this?
No.
So we're kind of in that territory. And if you go back and look at 11/22/63, we're in kind of heavy Aquarian territory, and we have that massive Aquarian stellium in February of 1962, which I think really kind of sets the 1960s off. So there's this interesting confluence of events, right? And by the way, I don't know if you guys remember this, but when Trump came into office, the first time in 2016, they were doing this play in Central Park where it was a version of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and Trump was playing Caesar, and the senators, of course, stab him at the end, right? So this Caesar theme with Trump was kind of there at the beginning of 2016. You bring in the Kill King piece, JFK, Camelot mythology. Trump says he's going to release all the JFK files. So we're in an interesting time loop here. Evan, you want to chime in? Do you have any insight you could want to bring to this?
Yeah. I actually want to look to the next Mars retrograde cycle, which is going from Virgo back into Leo, but it's aspecting Trump's Mars and his ascendant. Exactly. And this is really February 2027 I'm looking at. And there's a point where you have like Mars, the South Node, and Jupiter all basically in a conjunction in Leo. And to my mind, that would almost be another risky moment of like maybe it's a cardiac event when you think about Leo and the meaning of that sign. But I also actually worry about the eclipse coming up, the lunar eclipse on March 13th, because that's like a Sun-Saturn conjunction. But I think inevitably, I mean, just looking at some of these transits, whether it's like I said, early 2027 with like some health event, or somehow Trump having like a third term and his Uranus return being absolutely wild. I just think that like whatever the demise looks like, it's going to elevate not only him to like a godlike status, but also it's going to elevate maybe his whole lineage, right? There's just going to be this obsession with like having a Trump in the White House. And I know that Barron Trump is not of age anytime soon to be president, but it's interesting how like Barron Trump, as far as I know, is like not visible on social media at all. He has like no social presence, which I think is indicative of maybe like having plans at some point to emerge as a president or a leader or king or something. So I feel like that I think that is, like you're saying, Mario, definitely it feels like we kind of got a prelude to it. So I would be like really thinking about like, okay, what does the Trump family like reign look like, and how long does that last? I think that's like basically the question to ask.
Good question. Yeah, Barron Trump seems to be the wild card, right? I think his sun sign is 29 Pisces, so the true node is right on Barron Trump's sun sign right now, and Neptune is getting close to conjuncting Barron Trump's sun, and he's kind of unusual, right? Like he's really, he's really tall, and there's something about Barron Trump, and of course we have the Ingersoll Lockwood books, which are, kind of mythological in that regard with Barron Trump as well. But David, I'd love to hear your take on this whole JFK thing and the files and sort of this time loop back to 11/22/63.
Yeah, I mean, that was the same Jupiter-Saturn cycle, just it happened in Capricorn at the end of it, not Aquarius, but we are in this unique beginning of a Jupiter-Saturn 0 Aquarius cycle, but it was the same cycle, right? And it was the 3 years after where the JFK situation happened. It does feel very much like, because he is still the deep state, let's go after it. It does feel like the deep states changed their playbook, because this North Node and Neptune are together, and Trump came in when it was South Node Neptune in Pisces square Saturn in Sag, right? So that was, the media's lying in the first deceptions to be seen, although many people didn't see it, but if you were an astrologer, you should have seen it, right? It was easy to see. Now it's hard to see. Now it's like, are the media really being nice to him? Or is that part of the whole play, right? With this North Node Neptune conjunction and all these Pisces things we're going to see, especially Mercury retrograde and Aries ingressing back into Pisces with Venus on the North Node with a Mercury retrograde. There's definitely, with Mercury at its fall there and the haziness of Neptune, and then Neptune coming into Aries before they all come into Pisces or to Aries. It's really interesting to see that it does feel like the deep state has found a way to maybe calm the people to make them think Trump's overcome them, when it's quite the opposite, right? It almost feels like, what we see with the drone situation in November all over the East Coast, over our nuclear power plants, our military sites, and how they kind of started taking the side of the people, and and then it just went away. And then of course the bombing in Las Vegas, and that has been confirmed that he did. That guy, that Green Beret put out saying, "Hey, the whole drone situation is China," and a lot. And then the FBI confirmed it after there was a lot of stuff that finally happened on Twitter, of finally showing that one guy, I forgot his name, got the emails from him right before he killed himself and blew up. We don't even know if he really did kill himself, because the video footage doesn't show him shooting a gun in his head. So to me, it feels more like we have no idea here what's really going on, but it does feel like, something weird with the whole Biden administration too. This is all this Neptunian. I feel like, okay, the JFK file stuff being exposed will be nothing compared to what was the last 4 years. I feel like the Epstein list stuff, that's also an interesting thing. You see Bill Gates, who just had dinner with Trump just recently. I feel like that's a desperation attempt. I think a lot of people, like the way that he was, he's starting to do the rocking like he did when there was the whole antitrust, lawsuit against Microsoft in like the late 90s, like where he was like doing this, he's doing that all over again. So it does feel, it feels very weird, but we also have to remember this is exactly the same place where Pluto was when Benedict Arnold betrayed Washington. So there's going to be a betrayal. And I think to know who that is, it's going to be kind of the surprise. The funny part is the RFK chart, because Benedict Arnold was a Capricorn and very similar chart to RFK's chart. But
it was Benedict Arnold's birthday recently.
Yeah, like it's real. It's so, but I feel like there's going to be a big betrayal. And what's weird is if anybody, it does feel like maybe this Elon situation or even the Vivek Ramaswamy situation, because it was a Pluto Scorpio that Benedict Arnold was, and so it feels like connected with Vivek, and people didn't really sit well with Vivek in the last month when he kind of came after people about the visa situation with people from overseas, right? So I do feel like, part of a good thing is, as Mario was bringing up about Christ being the sacrificial lamb, it does feel like the betrayal, Judas, right, has to be there before. So what's interesting is, Washington was able to quell it, of course, although they almost lost New York after retaking it. They almost lost, a lot of intel and people based off that whole situation. So it is kind of weird because we're walking into where I think a lot of people want things exposed, but I don't think we'd be as surprised about some of the stuff as more as like what's been happening the last 4 years with the Biden administration, or even maybe a collusion with Trump, knowing, because it does feel very odd the way it came in and how it's left. There, by the way, Obama and Bush and Clinton will be at the inauguration, not the lunch that follows.
Okay. All right.
They'll be there, but Michelle Obama is not going to be there. And that's been the weird thing, is Michelle wasn't at Jimmy Carter's funeral. And I do feel that, I think Trump thinks he has this great understanding of what's happening, but there could be a betrayal where somebody's saying, no, it's all good when it's not all good inside. And so, that's where I think it gets a little dicey. I think even Speaker Johnson, being an Aquarius with Pluto now in the sun, we need to watch him. It does feel like he's not, maybe he does have Paul Ryan kind of vibes right now, who just flipped, by the way, and tried to act like Trump's great again and got called out for it. So I think if we're going to see that the letting things out into the public maybe isn't the big things that we want. I think because Trump's never answered the UFO and the UAP task force that's really been blocked by even all the people in the investigative committees in the House and the Senate, that's really, I think, the more sensitive spot. And I think Trump, he's kind of danced around that a lot and acted like it's no big deal when it's actually the big deal. That's how I know it's a big deal, because he hasn't acted like it's a big deal. Everything else he calls a big deal, but the one thing, he's like, oh yeah, we'll look into that, oh, that's the thing, I think that whoever in the House really starts to go in that with a House and Senate together and the White House, who is going to be the one that kind of pops up to try and block that? Is that Marco Rubio being Secretary of State? I don't think so. Is that a Kash Patel situation? That's kind of the interesting. Those are the people to start to look at, So I think there's going to be a betrayal, and that's it's too hard to gauge who that person is. And I think that the JFK files and stuff are part of the cycle of it coming to its close. I don't think it's going to blow our minds as much as we all knew that the CIA and internally would even go after our own people, let alone a president, especially if they're trying to shut down things that have happened in Israel at that time, or things that were happening even with not wanting to go to war, right? So,
bigger,
deeper going on.
It just dawned on me as we were talking about this that I'd never made this connection before. I'm not sure why, but Judas and Brutus sound very similar, right? They have a very similar sounding name, and of course, Caesar's final phrase "et tu, Brute" is "you too, Brutus," right? And Brutus is the one that really sets him up, right? So let's play. Who could be the Judas, right? Who could be the Brutus to Trump? I think you bring up a really interesting character with Mike Johnson, who, by the way, has Mars in Aries and is incredibly ambitious and will do just about anything. And I don't have the angle in front of me, but Johnson's Mars in Aries more than likely splits Trump's stellium in Cancer somewhere, right? So he's going to be at odds with Trump's. And it's interesting that Trump took him everywhere. Like Mike Johnson almost felt like his emotional support human for a while. He was at the Tyson fight. You could see him on the plane, with RFK and Elon and Don Jr. He started to trot, Mike Johnson around everywhere. And, I'm wondering if it's that you want to keep your friends closer and your enemies closer. And that's his thing with Mike Johnson. Because I think Mike Johnson is deeply compromised. They've got stuff on Mike Johnson. And he's also very ambitious. And under this Pluto transit, right, I think he's somebody who could do drastic measures. The other two guys that I would look at also, just based on the astrology, would be J.D. Vance, whose sun is in Trump's 12th house, and also Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner's true node is, if I'm not mistaken, exactly conjunct Trump's Pluto in the 12th house. And I've never trusted Jared Kushner from day one. We never voted for him. So these are the three characters that I think could quite possibly play that role. But then again, it could be somebody completely out of left field. And by the way, I think Vivek is out, right? And this brings up this other topic that I kind of want to throw into the breach here. And when I look at this chart, and I started to kind of play with this a little bit, if you look at this Mars, which is retrograding, it's going across Trump's Saturn and Mercury in Cancer in the 11th house. And for me, that stellium of Cancer has always been the heart of MAGA for Trump, right? It's the people, it's he's the Vox Populi with all of those Cancerian planets in that very, large group setting. And yet Mars is retrograding over those planets. And then you have somebody like Elon Musk and Vivek basically saying, we're going to bring these H-1B people into the country. And Elon Musk is unapologetic about it. And in fact, he's even insulting MAGA people on Twitter. And he's getting rid of accounts that have been deeply loyal to Trump. People like Laura Loomer. He took away her ability to make money. He took away her check mark, and whatever you think of Laura Loomer, she has been unabashedly loyal and supportive to Trump from day one, right? So I want to throw this out there. And somebody brought in this idea of the breakaway society in chat. We're dealing with a very small group of super rich, powerful influencers that come from Silicon Valley, and they're very, very different than the rest of America. And it's the rest of America that Trump has stood on the shoulders of to become elected. And with this Mars retrograde going through his 11th house and conjuncting his Saturn and Mercury, and this potential conflict of interest with the the Silicon Valley mafia. I'd love for all of you to talk about where theoretically MAGA or the working class or the people are in all of this, as it looks like Trump is really aligning with this silicon digital money true north. And are they compatible or are they incompatible? So we'll start off with you, Mario. We'll go around the wheel again.
Yeah, I'll actually just make this commentary, and then I'll hand it off to these guys over here to answer that question. But it's so fascinating to me that we're talking about Judas, betrayal, Mars, and Pluto, because Judas, symbolically, a lot of people have kind of come to the conclusion on a correspondence level that Judas very much aligns with Scorpio, and the Scorpion being a backbiter, right? And then the Scorpion having that stinger, right? And so I know people have even said that when you get stung with a scorpion, some people have said that the sort of swelling and the mark that it makes could be referred to as the kiss of Judas, right? And so, and we know how scorpionic people can kind of be with everything. So with Scorpio, under the old sort of system being ruled by Mars, and then in today's world, most people attribute it to Pluto. Very, very interesting. Judas coming into the picture with everything. And then also Scorpio corresponds with the death card as well. So for what it's worth, right? But I just want to make that commentary, and I'll let these guys answer that question that you just proposed.
Okay. Thanks, Mario.
Yeah, Robert, I think it's a great question. Well, Trump is obviously interested in being part of the most influential circles, both in the U.S. and in the world. So I do think that mostly they're at odds, these two sort of impulses towards, the automation of everything, the advancement of technology, and then sort of like the needs of the working class or just working people to have a job and have fulfillment through their work and dignity in that work. But I just think the transits with Uranus trining Pluto for the next couple of years, and even Venus, like David said earlier, kind of going into Gemini right before Uranus this year, I just think that it is a train that cannot be reversed entirely. And I think that, as the capital continues to flow towards companies that are working on like AI or social media, really anything in Silicon Valley, I think like Trump wants to be part of that, and have equity in that, or just be part of those interests. And, I think it's just like a weird world where like he can sort of embody that sort of everyman or whatever, and still like give great speeches and rallies. And there's like such an affection for Trump that like, it's almost like maybe it doesn't really matter. Like people have kind of, fallen in love with Trump to a point where it might not even, again, like be obvious or apparent or matter to them. But, I do think that, increasingly what we're going to see as Uranus goes into Gemini is that, things are just going to be automated. And I just don't see how that, like David said earlier, it's like maybe someone could be part of that for a while and like help build the robot or help build the AI, but like who knows, or help build the robot, but like who knows how are they going to have any long-term, employment through that. So yeah, I think that it is sort of a contradiction in a way.
Well, I think, isn't Trump the owner of True Social and a billionaire just like them? So, to me, it's kind of like he, was the biggest television show in 2003 through 6, right? It was Celebrity Apprentice, and he was always with celebrities, and now they didn't want to be with him. And now saw the same thing. The tech companies didn't allow him to be on, but this is kind of the difference now is like the celebrities didn't come back to Trump, but the tech companies are. I think also it does go to the point of like with this Mars retrograde in his 11th house, and especially being in Cancer with his Mercury, Venus, Saturn, right? It's like people feel like Trump's just kind of like, well, he speaks to the home of the country. But I think that, yeah, it reminds me of the beginning of the Obama administration when Pluto ingressed into Capricorn doing a whole Obamacare pitch. It's kind of like, well, you all aren't going to understand technology and stuff, but here's going to be like the cheap roadmap that you can get into this. meaning we got jobs to help you get into this. We're building data centers. It feels very much like the railroads as well, too. Like, how do you get people to build the railroads, right? That was a huge push during the end of Neptune Pisces, right? So it does feel very like to build this whole new architecture. We don't really have much else to really build on. Like oil and gas, there's that, but not everybody wants to do that. The problem that I think Elon addressed, which I don't like his tone, but he's correct, is that unfortunately Americans are really dumb. They don't know how to do these things. They don't train. Like most Americans still don't even know the difference of the iPhone 16 Pro Max to the new Android, and what is it, Qualcomm in there, or is it, is it the A18 Bionic chip in the Apple? They don't understand that. They don't understand how AI even works. They don't even understand how to train it. They don't even understand how the data centers work. They don't even understand how servers work today. They don't even understand how the cloud works today. So if you think about it, it does feel like whether or not it's about him liking people that have money, it's more about, well, where's the country have value? And that's one thing that Trump's always been able to kind of target, is where the people's values are at. But now it's a country. And so he knew it was oil, he knew it was gas, he knew it was corporate tax cuts, included tax cuts for everybody. And so it does feel like, well, let's leverage what we have, because to go to the old school manufacturing and start all over again is going to almost near be impossible unless it has something connected through these networks.
Right.
And so, it feels like that's why these alliances are coming together. And again, it's something that we all don't know. I think that that's the whole thing is, when Sam Altman was pushed out, it was about what's already out right now, Orion, which, believe it or not, is an AI that actually thinks before it puts out what your prompt is. And it's smarter than every scientist in the world. So it doesn't matter. Like, you could draw a sketch on a piece of paper. This all happened during Christmas, by the way, right? Like, Orion is fully out, right? And the pro version of it's out. So you could take a sketch and be like, I want to be in space and I want to build a data center in space, and kind of just sketch it out. And it will literally figure it out, tell you the dimensions, tell you what you need, and make the architecture of it and do everything, right? So we're already at this event where AI is already smarter than humans. And so, it's as smart as they already tested it against every scientist in the world, and they can't do it, not even as close to fast, and they can't even do it in 5 years, let alone 5 seconds. So we're at a place to where when they pushed Sam Altman out, it was because of this idea of like, oh my gosh, generative AI becoming aware, self-aware. Even Sam Altman's been playing with singularity, like, uh-oh. And then, of course, we just saw a story in the last week about a whistleblower at AI's death, right? And the mother coming out, that there's something much more intense that's going on in this area, but it also goes to the defense of the country. We see Palmer Luckey, he moved after selling Oculus here in Newport Beach to Meta, to being one of the biggest military contractors for drone technology, and especially in the swarm drone technology. So it's not surprising to me, but unfortunately, a lot of MAGA is not hip to be square with much. And so it shows the smartness of Trump knowing how to communicate to MAGA, but doesn't talk about the things that are really happening in the world. And so we have to remember that Trump was a Democrat. Trump knows every celebrity. The other thing, too, is the royal family. That's in a whole weird situation. So the Canada grab seems very much like a negotiating tool. Like, you can keep the British Isles in your little United Kingdom, but we're going to take Canada, like we originally would, because you guys don't even know what you're doing next. We don't know what Charles III's doing. He's about to do a world tour. He's not going to meet with Trump. He's the only big person he won't meet with in 2025. But it's really interesting to see that he's dying of cancer. The whole use of AI with the princess, right, which technically is the term, right, the Duchess Kate now, because she's next in line, right, with her husband, that she has cancer too, but they used AI pictures of her and her family. Like, obviously there's something way bigger going on about the royal family. Plus there's been stuff that came out during the first hearing for the new Treasury Secretary about the debt money being from the crown that we have to figure out, that's part of the Fed on the private parts of it that's hidden, right? The Bank of England and so forth. So I think the money that's flowed through tech as well, since I'm in tech and I understand it well, and I'm here in California, basically all venture capital money in the last 2 years has been into AI and the healthcare system as well, but only through technologies that use AI and use these new kind of technologies. So if you're smart, you would go there. And that's why Don Jr. pushed for JD Vance, because JD Vance's connections to all those guys was kind of like a reaffirmation to be with the Trump team. Then you get RFK, who obviously there was weird secret deals there, to get him on board and leave his presidency to become, head of NIH and so forth. So I do see it as maybe not as nefarious, but what's nefarious is there's so much that many people don't understand. But if you really did the work, it's there for you to see. All the VC money is going into that. All the VC money is going into, you have to have the hardware. Look at NVIDIA. That's the biggest stock. Actually, NVIDIA's outperformed Bitcoin. Most people don't know that, but right, you have NVIDIA who's creating the actual products, and every other company, whether it's Asus or whether it's MSI, they're then copying and getting the availability to make those GPUs, but it's NVIDIA that owns all that property of that. Intellectual property wise, you have the CHIPS Act thing that came bipartisan that's about to turn on in Arizona, right? Like that's almost getting ready to be done. And that feels like the robotic chips. That feels like the cheap chips that are going to come in there, but still Taiwan is going to be kind of where they're building the more nuanced and higher quality stuff. So I think it's all intermixed, and I feel bad because I think it's not just MAGA, but it's lefties. I think that most of Americans are completely in the dark when it comes to how technology works, what the world's doing, and I feel like Biden's speech about trying to connect the oligarchy of billionaires to tech billionaires being the next military industrial complex was missing, because I think you can't say that when you're giving George Soros a fucking presidential freedom honor medal. So it's trying to put it on them when it's more like you need to follow the money that's actually controlling those men. And how many senators and on both sides of the aisle and House representatives own Meta stock, own things that go into OpenAI, Microsoft especially, right? So to me, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where was Bill Gates talking to Trump about health, or was he really talking about Microsoft and OpenAI? I mean, like that's the bigger question that people have to have, is that it's so beyond most people's comprehension. And I feel bad because a lot of people have really been distracted, and a lot of people don't want to understand what's happening in those areas, right? It's like, oh, they're California, or oh, it's too techy, and oh, humanity won't go that way. That's what they said about the light bulb. That's what they said about television. The idea that humanity is just going to just turn down these technologies is ludicrous, especially with Pluto and Aquarius. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's you're clearly over the target, but it does speak to this kind of Aquarian dilemma that we're in now, or at least potentially the Aquarian dilemma. Because when you look at something like MAGA, or if you talk to Steve Bannon, the working class, right? Steve Bannon went to war with Elon Musk about his language around the H-1B1. And he said he may have gotten a seat at the table due to his money, but he needs to sit in the back of the room, because he needs to understand what built this thing and what this is about. And Bannon says, I'm an absolutist. My goal is to essentially make America, that's where Trump got Make America Great Again. It's from Bannon, right? So you have this, it kind of reminds me in some ways of the beginning of that movie AI, where, you know, these people are, you know, beating the shit out of and sacrificing these robots because they've made their lives a living hell, right? And so we have this group of people, and Trump is using this language and this rhetoric to get them to think about, well, we're going to bring manufacturing back, and we're going to do all these things that we do better than anybody else in the world, right? And what he does with all that Cancerian energy is he stirs up nostalgia, because Cancer is looking backwards. And so he keys into this nostalgia chord that his base is desperately wanting, right? Because his base has been moved into this new world where they can't speak their minds. They don't know what a man or a woman is. They're supposed to feel guilty about something that they've never, ever been a part of or done, which would be, you know, kind of under the realm of racism, right? So his base has gotten kind of moved out into this sort of untethered sort of social space, right? Created by all this kind of critical Marxist theory. And they're just, you know, really craving for some fucking meat and potatoes again, you know, and not some kind of, vegan shake or, you know, so on the one hand, you have this group of people who have responded to this man's call, and then his call has been to make that world manifest for them again in a real sort of way, right? And it's a group, right? And groups are Aquarian. And then you have this kind of veer off to the world you're talking about, David, which is this, it's a different kind of unexplored space. It's a space where MAGA and the working class people really have no place, if we're being quite honest, not just due to the fact that they may not know about the latest chip deal or technology, that they're ultimately obsolete, right? The planned obsolescence. And you can talk to Elon Musk about it and his little Optimus army that he's building, right? So we're really at a crossroads here. And Trump is trying to hold the center and continue to build. Well, we're going to make America even fucking greater than it ever was. We'll get Canada and we'll get Greenland, right? So he's kind of moving things around so that he can somehow, you know, keep his base sort of close to him. But at the same time, it's clear that he's doing all these other deals and is aligned with this different, like he took a shit ton of money from Miriam Adelson, right? Like $500 million. But Miriam Adelson's money is different than Elon Musk's money. Her money is different than Peter Thiel's money or David Sachs's money, right? They do different things in the Trump world. So for me, when we get into this idea of Aquarius, it's a very interesting discussion because we're at this cusp of this time where, you know, these people are grappling with their lives and humanity and values and Christianity and God and all the things that are kind of bundled into his voter base. And he has to juggle that, right? He has to make sure these people, you know, are there for the journey while he's doing all, you know, it's like Elon Musk has been at his house for what, 3 weeks? Like, what were they doing there? They're cooking up these fucking meme coins. That's what they were doing there. Right. So I feel like this Pluto Sun conjunction in Aquarius really speaks to this idea of, you know, where we are, where we've been, and ultimately where all this is headed. And we talked about Trump as a sacrifice potentially, right? But this idea of sacrifice in terms of the collective or the numbers of people, you know, the jobs that'll be sacrificed, the vocations that'll be sacrificed because of the investment in AI and robotics and all these things. I feel like that's a huge, huge existential crisis and dilemma that we're approaching here. And if we bring it back to the nodes, I just wanted to throw this back out to you guys. We've got this, 18-month period roughly, with the true node in Pisces, where we're sort of in this kind of Bardo state, right? We're sort of out in this kind of, you know, metaphysical limbo. You know, there's not a lot of theoretically the action is going to be within and not without. But it's really the precursor to that true node moving into Aquarius. We're in this transitional kind of liminal zone for about the next 18 months. And then when those nodes flip, that's when that's when the big action starts to take place. In the meantime, we're going to have a lot of other things on our plate as well. So, I think this is a really interesting dynamic. How do we incorporate the past and manage the future? This is all on Trump's plate, right? So, Mario, I'm gonna hand this off to you. You guys can chop on it afterwards, and then we'll bring this back. We'll see where we want to go after that.
Yeah, I want to talk about just what you mentioned right now regarding sacrifice, and I can't help but think of the sacrifice that the basically younger generations tend to be, and so there's a lot of myths that kind of surround this. So as an example, like Saturn doesn't want to get dethroned, so he eats his children. There's even these older alchemical illustrations where Saturn is literally using his scythe to chop off the legs of Mercury, right? And so there's this thing going on right now where I can just see it so clearly, the younger generation being sacrificed with where culture is moving towards, with what's being prioritized, with the opportunities they're kind of not receiving in a way. Although personally, I'm optimistic about the future. It seems as though the trajectory is always the younger generation is always kind of the fuel for the older generation. Because they know how to manipulate things and take advantage of the situation and things like that, right? So as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the sacrificial nature of the younger generation to the older generation, looking at how younger generations, they're sort of like how they look at the world and sort of their future, the likelihood of them being able to buy a house. Let alone, other things in their life and everything else, right? How that's becoming more impossible for younger generations, right? And then they ask their parents, like, how did you buy your house? Or how did you buy your vehicles? And this and that. And they tell them stories, and it's seemingly it was much easier for them, right? Before the credit scoring system and all sorts of other things got put into place, right? But this just reminded me to bring it back to Aquarius of the whole dynamic with the cupbearer or the water bearer in Greek mythology, and one of the lines in which, or the lines of mythology in which Aquarius was actually created, and the whole idea is that Zeus wanted a cupbearer, and so he transformed himself into an eagle, and the eagle is a classic symbol of a king, right? Of Jupiterian energy, Jupiter being the king of the planets and everything else. So his previous cupbearer was a woman who spilled some of the nectar of the gods, some of that ambrosia. This is a classic thing with Aquarius symbolism too, that the urn of Aquarius contains like the elixir of life or something along these lines, right? The elixir or nectar or ambrosia of immortality. And then it gets spilled. There's like multiple myths that kind of encode this same thing. And so Zeus replaced the cupbearer that had spilled some of the nectar and replaced it with a young boy, Ganymede, and he basically kidnapped him. And this mythology, this storyline is really interesting. You can find examples of Ganymede, this really beautiful young cupbearer, alongside an eagle, right? And basically, a lot of people say that this myth alludes to essentially the relationship that a lot of kings have had with young boys, and that there's a pedophilic angle with this, and that this sort of preference has been referred to actually as the vice of kings. And so there's a book that I have by a guy named Jason Horsley. It's actually kind of interesting. I was reminded of it today preparing for this chat, called The Vice of Kings. That's what the whole entire book is about. And I thought it was brilliant symbolic matchmaking that he chose to show a young boy with spilt milk.
Yeah.
It's alluding to this cupbearer sort of dynamic. But it just reminds me of what the vice of kings is, and how some kings, depending on if they're a righteous king or tyrannical king, how they look at the younger generation, right? Is it something to be fostered and nurtured and truly taken care of, or is it something to be taken advantage of, basically, right? So I don't think that really answers what question you brought up.
No, but that's a really interesting point, right? And if you think of Elon Musk, But he's younger than Trump. Now he's not a boy, but he clearly acts like a boy, especially if he feels pissed off, right? He'll have a temper tantrum like a spoiled little boy. So that's an interesting connection.
Yeah. No, I thought so too. But I'm sorry, you might have to repeat the question.
No, I mean, basically to sum it up, it's like, we have a group of people that are blue collar, working class folk, right, that have invested probably literally, figuratively into Trump because they see him as the alternative to the chaos that they had been thrust into, right? And so those people don't have the same kind of, say, working knowledge of technology or the same kind of insight that Trump's new inner circle has. So the question is, how does he manage? And those people, theoretically, if it's cancer, they represent the past. They represent the America that Trump, wants to make great again. Right? That's who they are. They're, I'm not saying that they're not people of the present or not people of the moment, but their ideals and their values are rooted somewhere else. Then I can tell you right now, they're not Elon Musk's values,
right,
or they're not Peter Thiel's values, right? So Trump has to manage that in some ways, while at the same time honoring this new donor class, which can amplify his wealth and his reach in ways that perhaps no other president has had access to, right? And their version of the world, or their version of the future, is quite elitist in my opinion, and doesn't really include the people that went to all those rallies. Now you'll find computer programmers and smart people at Trump's rallies, but that's not the breadbasket, right, that Trump is pulling from.
There you go. I mean, you said it. I was just going to say the classic way you manage people is through bread and circus tactics, right?
Yeah.
Have sort of that distraction. Pretty much, they're fairly malleable. That's sort of the thing, right? And so that's more of a general sort of thing. But Trump, in and of himself, I think he's a character more so personally. There could be multiple Trumps or what have you. I don't know. But I see him as more of a character, as more of this is a world stage sort of thing. And whether you like him or you hate him, he is magnetic, right? He's one of my favorite entertainers on a world stage sort of level, right? I don't vote. That's not my thing or whatever. But I can acknowledge that he is entertaining as hell. And I think that as long as you have the bread and circus sort of dynamic going, I think for the most part he'll be solid. So that's kind of my personal opinion. But I also know too, with propaganda, you can't sway. You have to do things in steps, just like what I was saying earlier. You can't do anything too radical. You might lose people or whatever. I understand that there's a science and there's kind of almost like a grace or something with manipulating the people in a way. But just broadly, bread and circus, I think that's still going to be in effect, and people will generally just kind of go with the current of things with that.
So what you're saying is that while there's this potentially massive paradigm shift and moving to a state of future shock, bread and circus will be the thing that will keep the masses at bay and get them to kind of go along with the program, right?
I think it's just the tried and true tactic that empires have understood for a while now, right? And so if you get people too uncomfortable, there can be a revolt. I don't think people even know how to revolt anymore. I don't think people know how to overthrow a government anymore. I don't think people know how to do a lot of things like that. People are so domesticated basically that I don't think it's that big of a challenge to keep people in line and keep them coloring within the lines.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion though.
No, well, I think it's common. That's common sense actually when you look at it. All right. So Cal, you want to check in on this? I mean, this is the horns, I think, of the Aquarian dilemma, honoring like one group, managing one group, and beginning to incorporate these other agencies that are very, very different than the group that they represent.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I mean, I think I think by the time a Caesar-like figure emerges, the existing system has already failed. So, like, I almost think the system's dysfunction has validated Trump, right? Like, so much of Trump's legitimacy is built on this notion of like, well, we've been just watching this like red versus blue revolving door for so many decades now, and like the government can't even like pass really anything unless it's again like a TikTok ban or something to silence everybody. So it's like what's going on here? And I would say, just to like bring in a couple other concepts we've been talking about, you know, I think the formula is pretty obvious. Like artificial intelligence is like maximizing value generation and theoretically minimizing labor costs. And so people are going to need, countries and people are going to need AI to compete in a free market, right? And that's how the US is going to compete increasingly. And I think that's why Trump wants to go after Greenland or Canada. You know, Greenland has raw materials, precious metals that we would need to like actually build the chips. And so I feel like, you know, his priorities are pretty clearly like, okay, how can we compete on these in this new Aquarian sort of, well, it's not the Aquarian age, but like just in this sort of like technologic sort of advancement. But also what's interesting is like, you know, he wants to celebrate the 250-year anniversary of the US, right? And like I think he wants to celebrate it right this summer and next summer. And that's going to be an interesting dichotomy because those types of events, the anniversary of the United States, it is going to be this very patriotic event. And there is going to be, that's like really Trump's time to shine as that character, like you said, Mario. And so I don't know if that's going to be used as sort of like a guise for the fact that, you know, maybe the everyday worker is going to fall behind because, you know, yeah, so I think that that's going to be interesting. And one more point I want to make, which I think is still tied into all this, is that, you know, I do think that the generational experiences are increasingly diverging, which is making this all more complicated. So, like, I think that is like one of the clashes of civilization that we're experiencing right now. You know, because like there was that Clash of Civilizations book that Samuel Huntington wrote like 30 years ago or something. It was about how like generations of or humanity competed over land and then eventually over culture and whatnot. But I think that like increasingly clashes are going to be generational because technology is advancing so much. The different the experiences of generations is so vastly different now over time. And so like you're going to have these young people born with Pluto in Aquarius who like completely master or are extensions of AI at a certain point and are seen as almost like alien to people who are 40, 50 years older than them. And, you know, it's like, are the young people going to create new industries, displace workers who are much older? And is that going to breed resentment? You know, so that's also something to keep in mind is like, you know, like, how are we even going to like be a community, a cohesive community when there is no like less and less of a way to relate? So, I mean, I don't want to make that too dark though. I think the North Node in Pisces right now is like, okay, well, like let's find the common like experiences. Like obviously there's still things that make us human, like suffering, like death, like David said earlier. So, anyways, I think there's just like a lot of Rubik's cubes to solve right now. And, you know, I don't know. Let's just see how that all plays out.
Yeah. Yeah. DP, you want to add to this?
Yeah. We have a recruiting problem in America. So I've said it before, but Pluto Sag always is the generation, doesn't matter when, that they go on the adventure that wasn't their chosen adventure. Pluto representing the other. So you look at the workforce right now and the MAGA movement, not really, you know, the sacrifice of them is what the election was about. Because if you think about it, people who voted for Trump work hard. People who voted for Kamala don't want to work. They just want to stay on COVID money or have a government job and be on the nanny state. So obviously the nanny state's being cut, while at the same time there's a recruiting problem. And I think if you read between the lines of Pete Hegseth's, you know, time in the Senate this week, when they asked him about like, why do you want to get women out of combat zones? It's not that he wants to get women out of combat zones. It's more about, if you think about the bipartisan, you know, signature of the last Defense Act with how they've now made it now automatic, right, for anybody, man or woman, 18 years old in America that's a citizen to be in the selective service. It's more about getting it back to where we're coming into, where Uranus coming into to Gemini brings up the great wars of America. You got all this Aries coming up. So I feel like it's going to be a simultaneous, like, hey, what do you need? You need a Dana White that's always out there pushing this masculine form of masculinity, right? You see Dana White everywhere now, very much the voice. You see all these other masculine kind of social media things that follow the movement that the women who vote for MAGA are down for because they believe in that same ideology, because it's more naturally what it's been for all of humanity. That you get to this kind of understanding of like, where are people going to go? Well, there's obviously plenty of places through war. There's plenty of places through building something, but the power is the big issue with technology, right? So the other thing is nuclear power plants. You look at Enron coming up with these like ideas of having like these eggs that are like these mini nuclear power plants in your house. Like, is that where, the oil and gas industry is going to be the ones that start to take over the new nuclear kind of phase of things? And then, jobs and so forth, they're going to have something that you're actually doing if robots are going to take over all these other things, and including AI taking over, jobs that would be normally thought of as really good or smart, whether it's management of, people or HR or any, like all these departments that AI can do. If it can do spreadsheets to everything, you got to see that your job's gone. The last kind of place is going to be the people that really use the AI of creating the ideas and know how to train the data that might not be used like old books or something that actually make some sort of use case, and how well you can create an API that every other AI system is going to want as well as data. So it becomes this place to where many people aren't going to have a place to go. So it does feel very much like, well, that's how you get the recruiting numbers back up. At the same time, enough people to go into the military for whether it's, a draft that's going to come, because we are entering into the astrology of America, getting into the biggest wars, right? Like, whether you want to try and believe in the New Age movement that we're going to avoid that, or you are somebody who's so Q and that won't happen. Like, sorry, but the astrology says that we're coming into that phase. So, of course, Trump was going to win the election based off that. Like, it was simple to see the recruiting numbers are down. The Defense Act passed this automation for selective service. You get a Pete Hegseth who's about getting the woke out, but also, the women, but it's not about the women to be in combat zone. They'll still be there, but to get them back to building.
Well, it's not just, with Hegseth, it's not just getting the women out. You look at him, he's young, right? He's young, he's virile. He's the kind of guy that you would want to have as your Secretary of Defense. You don't want some old dude basically trying to cheerlead from the sidelines to get young men to go to war, right? You want somebody who's got a cool fucking tattoo, slicks his hair back like Gavin Newsom, and looks like he gets to the gym about 4 or 5 days a week, right? Like, it's like, that's a program. Like, he's a program. And he worked at Fox News, and but he fits the type, and he fits the main thing.
He was a SEAL, right? So it's like he's the best of the best when it comes to the military. So it's also would be, I think, the first time an enlisted person, not a officer, is defense secretary, since, if you were to think about it, maybe one of the other people during the Revolutionary War, right? Like, this idea of like, but again, it starts to get really kind of in the weeds if you try to go into the past. This is all very military based. Even having, I think, Marco Rubio, who is like the hardest core China person, right, to be the Secretary of State, it means they're really focused on China. And the other thing I want to say too is, like, people think that OpenAI, all these billionaires, right, that are going to be at Trump's rally are about social media. It's not. It's about the hardware. Right? Like Meta, it's not about their algorithm or Facebook or their Instagram. It's about they're fully in VR. They're fully got AI as well. And the hardware that they produce. Apple's about the hardware and the chips they make. And yes, and their ecosystem, but it's their computers, their phones, their Vision Pro, their things that they make. OpenAI is like the subsidiary of Microsoft, which is in everything, and especially the government. Let's remember, the government's not run on Apple, it's run on Microsoft, and it's run on IBM, and it's run on, right? And OpenAI is mixed with Copilot in Microsoft Windows. Okay, so people, and now AI is, of course, incorporated fully with Apple through OpenAI. So when you start looking at it, it's about all these hardwares, and it's all about these people who got all the chips and that we actually make the chips for. So I think people aren't really ready to understand, like, the government isn't run on your Apple MacBook Pro. Okay? It's not. It's run off PCs and it's run off Windows-based systems or Linux-based systems. There is no such thing as an Apple, okay, in the government. So people are really, and so that's the people is what they use as Apple stuff, which is toys with some cool features. We are at a place to where the whole thing's about transferring the whole society into this whole entire next phase of how it's going to operate and how we are going to be all in different roles and different ways of how life is, the same way it was during the Industrial Revolution. I mean, and so the nanny state's going to go away first, and then all that money opens up, and they're going to do the deportations first. So people, you have to remember too that with the deportations that's going to happen, okay, who is going to pick stuff? Well, John Deere and all them already have AI built in all their new stuff that's coming out. All their new tractors can do it themselves. Or I saw somebody in the chat saying they're a carpenter. Go to a car factory right now. You have to pay a lot of money to get an AMG because they still hand make the motor and hand build the car, or certain brands. Every other brand is down in Mexico or down in America or Canada, and all the robots build 95% of that car, and humans just kind of check, make sure it's okay. When it comes to houses, imagine just where the technology will be in 3 years from now, going down a street and just the robots going and do it better than probably humans do it and move on to the next one. I mean, I don't think that people get it yet. They don't want to hold on. And that's the part of Neptune and Pisces is also the illusion that you are bigger and you have more things than you have. You kind of have to accept where things are at and see through the veil, right? Like as a 12th houser, you have to be like, okay, I'm addicted to cocaine. Let me see that I'm addicted to cocaine and get off it. And then let me see what's really going on with my life. So people are addicted to this old way of this old life, and they're not ready for what's next. They're not ready. They're going to go back to the Bible. And that's I think the big thing of this whole thing is like, we know Trump is not the spiritual religious person that people says he is. He never has proven that, right? He uses that as a way to get in with MAGA, right? So it's the irony too of the end of this kind of Piscean energy of religion being way bonkers and people just believing that Q's going to save the day and that also that Jesus is coming through to save their job and save their this and save their that. But the world's going a whole different direction, whether they like it or not. And I think that's going to be the thing that people have to start to accept. They're addicted to way more extreme things like TikTok or Instagram or any of them are all more addictive than cocaine. So they're already lost into all that stuff. They're lost in thinking that their job that was based off a nanny state, because most of the jobs that most people work at is nanny state based if you actually look down at the end of it. And, you know, the tech people, the money is all in there and they don't base it off your credit score. So you want to get out of the system? Believe it or not, the tech entrepreneurs are the ones out of it because we don't go off credit score. I get loans because not my credit score. It's about how much of tech and how many users I have. And so that's the other thing people have to think about is this TikTok man. Why haven't you built your own network yet? Like, that's the whole thing. Like, you're wasting your time with Pluto and Aquarius. That means somebody's going to control your access to the world, whether you like it or not. That's what this is really bringing in. So when this happened, I was like, I'm so glad I have my own app. I'm for 10 years now, and I built all this. So if all that went down, not only would I hook up to Starlink and I have my generators and everything, I would find my way to move servers to different places physically because I know how to build a physical server. And anybody who would finally get out of all those crazy things to get on the new internet and to get off of that would be able to find me and go on. That's where you kind of have to be. Because that's how it's going to be. If you think that you're going to just make your life just in your own lane through these other people's things, you're fucked.
Right. And TikTok has, like, expose people to like other societies and like further, theoretically, like maybe even destabilize us. But I want to just add a point to what David just said, which I think you've articulated very well. But like AI, yes, it's like barreling forward, but then it's like the second question is, is the society or are the societies building it even stable? And I think that's going to be the question with the United States right now. Like I know it didn't happen this way with TikTok, but I was thinking about it. I was like, what if they had banned it like fully outright for like forever, like yesterday, right before tax season, taking away all these like creators or businesses on TikTok's like future revenue and then asking them to cough up money for, 2024 taxes. Like, I could see a scenario in the near future, whether it's this year or next year, where like there's some kind of movement to like boycott even like paying taxes. Like stuff like crazy stuff like that could happen like in the next few years while Pluto is going through this sign. And I feel like, that's what's always on my mind is like, is the United States right now even in a place where, it not only does it have like the technological prowess above and beyond whatever maybe China or another country is doing, but like, socioeconomically and just in terms of the society, like, is it even stable enough right now? Like, I don't know, right? Like, with the Pluto return, obviously we already had that, but I just think during Pluto and Aquarius, like, is there sort of like a, is there something like a black swan event or like where people decide no taxation without representation, where they feel like they're not being represented, appropriately. So it's like, obviously the United States is a land of ingenuity and always has been, but like, is there even like the momentum right now? Like that's another question I have.
Well, I think Mario brought something up that was connected to what you're saying, that people don't really know how to throw a revolution. So, I mean, maybe, I guess if they can get Bud Light to get rid of, their tranny spokesperson, they can throw a revolution. But here's what I think. I think
you have to blow up every cell tower, and you have to do things that you would never, most people would be too afraid to do. You'd have to blow up every cell tower. You'd have to like cut out the grid. You'd have to like do things that most people would just be like, no, that's a little bit too far. And that's actually what revolution is. You have to go beyond what's too far. And so most people wouldn't do it. Most people aren't going to take out all the fucking LED street lamps, like just to get rid of that kind of vibe, right? Let alone the big stuff that has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, for Lenin, it was a lot easier, wasn't it? All he had to do was capture a train station and a couple of post offices with the telegraphs in them. And then, he secured basically a communication and transport. It's much easier back then. But to your point, Evan, I think that Trump is going to get rid of income tax as we know it, right? And I think look, my sense here is that they're going to go hard on Bitcoin in a big way, and that they're going to try to replace the Federal Reserve. That's another part of this. And you're going to get people, you're going to get libertarians, or you're going to get a lot of people who are not for the Federal Reserve, and they're going to be really happy. Great. Like we get to circumnavigate the fiat money system. The Fed is dead. We'll replace the fake dollars with fake digital dollars and Bitcoin. I really think that this is where this is going. And then what will happen is that they'll tax every transaction, and it'll be a federal tax. And the other thing that we know about transactions is that they're on a ledger sheet. So everything will be transparent, right? So now you're getting rid of the IRS. They don't have any function anymore. How many people would be thrilled that the IRS isn't around, hounding them for their
no more agents, because the AI itself will look at the transaction and do it better. And
exactly. Exactly. I mean, people will cheer this on, right? They'll be thrilled. But again, what will be the price that they'll have to pay? Well, everything that you purchase is going to be transparent. And some people will say, well, that's fine because you wouldn't be able to purchase children or whatever, right? We've heard this argument before from people that are really pro this type of currency. But that's what's going to happen. So, Evan, to your point, I think they'll nip the revolution for taxes in the bud, right? it's not bread and circus, but it's a way of controlling the masses. And that's what they'll do. That's what they'll figure out. And so this gets into the whole Doge thing. Well, we'll just eliminate all these government jobs that the IRS is taking up. And oh yeah, all these Federal Reserve employees, well, they're going to go too, even though it's not federal. So that's what I think is going to happen ultimately. And this gets into this whole currency exchange, because the dollar is dead, right? The dollar is part of a physical world, theoretically, and it's part of an anonymous world. And as we move into this Pluto, and I mean, all these outer planets, right? Neptune and Aries, Saturn and Aries, Uranus and Gemini, Pluto and Aquarius. We don't get to Earth until Saturn goes into Taurus in 2030, which is synonymous with Agenda 2030, by the way. We're in this state where there's no physical realm. And David, you brought up Chiron in Taurus. That's like a wounded physical world, right? That's like dealing with the physical world in a way that's really uncomfortable. You know, a lot of people that have Chiron and Taurus natally have a hard time with being on the earth and being in an earth suit, right?
Making money, and all the products that are at the end of Aries, Chiron, and into Taurus in those first 10 degrees are not worth shit. Try and tell me a 77 vehicle is worth anything. There is no classic 77 vehicle worth shit. There is no 70s stuff, the carpet, the furniture. Nobody's trying to, oh my God, you have a really cool 70s looking house like that. No, everything that comes out. So that's why I feel like Tesla's the new AMC. I mean, like all of it. Like, and so you're right. It's not going to be physical. And at the same time, it's kind of like that whole, like, move the backing of the dollar, as you said. But the problem is once quantum computing from another country comes in that can disrupt that system, that's how you get us to a war, right? So it's kind of like setting up the war intentionally, the way we set up the war by giving all of our old equipment, which we've been doing to Ukraine, to the United Kingdom, well, back then England, right? And letting them use it against the Nazis. It's like the same thing. It's like, oh, you know what? We're moving this money and all this stuff. And like, we've set ourselves up to be this great thing. And this idea of this golden age, right? Well, what are you going to do with people that have, like, let's say a little 401k or the government backed bonds that go bad or whatever? Again, that's where this whole thing, like, most of these people have, because now they're saying it's not the 1% that are millionaires. They're saying 1 in 13 people are, but they're doing that bad stuff. Their net worth because of, like, all of their retirement, their life insurance and stuff like that, right? And especially their homes. That's where they're going to gut people, is be like, well, you want the golden age where you don't, here, instead of a social security check, we're not going to do that anymore. Guess what? You can have this UBI and you don't have to worry about these things. And then the tax is just taken off the transactions you make. So you don't have to pay a tax if you're not buying a bunch of things. And so they're going to make people sign this kind of reverse mortgage thing. Like, you know what? But we take over the land once you're gone. You don't get to take it over to your next kid.
Right. There's no passing down the generation.
What's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just to add in, I think that there will also be a theme this year, though, of the federal government going up against some of these governors in blue states, right?
Yeah.
Like, just starting day 2 of Trump's administration, apparently they're going to do like a raid in Chicago. I think other major cities as part of this.
They've called that off.
Oh, they have. Okay. Well, you know, I would imagine that there'd be some scenarios like that this year where, you know, there is some, I don't know, let's say a raid or, you know, towards like in a sanctuary city. And, you know, obviously like the governors in that state are not, or the mayors in that city are not going to go quietly into that situation. So I'm also wondering, I just feel like there's a fragmentation possibility in the US, right? Especially with Uranus going to Gemini, aligning with the Civil War, Uranus position. And, you know, that also just raises that question of like, here's another variable of like, okay, we have these initiatives. We want to, you know, eliminate the income tax or whatever, but now we need money to fight this, you know, war with these other states. Like, it just gets very convoluted. But, you know, on top of that, just wanted to add one other thing. You know, with Pluto and Aquarius, we have seen in prior cycles of Pluto and Aquarius, like, advanced weaponry, like gunpowder, like the whole concept and formula for like gunpowder was invented in China in like the 11th century, I believe, the last time or many times ago that Pluto was in Aquarius. So I'm also wondering, like, okay, like even if the U.S. becomes increasingly dysfunctional because, like, again, there's a whole, like, sort of dichotomy between the states and the feds. I still feel like there's probably going to be some kind of broader war that we get roped into. So I feel like if the U.S. is going to like kind of become a united front again, it's probably in response to some type of like war that we just like don't foresee because of some kind of like new application of AI or technology that we just like can't even conceive of from another country. That's like all of a sudden, okay, we're under threat, power's out across the country, or there's a cyber attack, or there's something where we have to like relocalize, think in a community-centered way again, and then maybe like remind ourselves what it means to be an American. Like that's just what I keep, and I'm kind of channeling a little bit here, but I just keep seeing like this maybe like short-term like civil conflict, whether it's a full-blown civil war, I'm not sure, but like I'm just seeing like this fragmentation at first in the U.S., but I still think that there's probably going to be some sort of, again, black swan event that brings us together. But yeah, it's obviously that's a lot, but yeah.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point. And one of the entities I've been thinking about in terms of like a global conflict or theater is actually the EU. And it feels to me like there's bad blood between Trump and the EU. And there's this, there's a lot that's been happening with like forced migration. You see these scenarios in places like Ireland that have been overrun or about to be overrun by all these fighting age men from places like Somalia and Albania. They're actually, building military training camps in Ireland. You have people that are living there now that are openly saying that they're going to ruin the Irish way of life. Like being an Irishman or an Irish woman will be very different 20 years from now. We're seeing this in England with the major amount of Muslims that have been moving to England over the last 20 years, right? 10 years, really, if you want to get into a narrow bandwidth. It's happening in France, it's happening in Germany, it's happening all over Europe, right? So we have a major crisis, a major demographic crisis taking place in Europe. And you have the Europeans at great risk from quote unquote outsiders. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. And if the Europeans that are, or the native French or the native Germans or the native Italians wind up coming into conflict with their own government around this whole idea of what we call the replacement, the replacement group or the replacement theory. And where does the United States fall in with this? Do they just let it happen? Do they get involved? Right. And, this goes back to this whole idea of, Prince William and forming a standing army with the EU and being the head of that army and, taking on the role potentially of the Antichrist. So I think that this thing with the European Union is fraught with tension and conflict. I don't think it's Russia. I don't think it's Israel, because Trump and Israel are kind of on the same page, though I think he hates Netanyahu. I think, and this goes back in some ways to, 1776 and Pluto and Aquarius, after that, we're actually in a war with a European country, and it's England, right? So that's my sense. I feel like the EU is the pressure cooker. And also Trump's got this thing with tariffs and production and this competition with the EU. I feel like that's on the table. I don't know if you guys want to get into that or answer that or have anything to add to that. If you do, that'd be great. If not, then why don't we do this?
Point there.
We'll go around and we'll just see what you guys want to kind of end this thing off with. If you want to chime in with that, great. If not, just bring to the table what you want to bring to the table before we get out of here.
Just to add one point to that, Robert, I believe the Dalai Lama said in an interview a few weeks ago that, like, I don't know if he was talking about the UK or France, but he said something to the effect of like that country should be allowed to preserve their culture. And I thought that, and I think the interviewer was pretty astounded by that. But I do think that there is increasingly a conversation about about that point you're raising in you. But anyways, I'll let Mario. I'm assuming you want to speak on that.
Oh no, I mean it's an interesting dynamic for sure. Trafficking is such a major thing of people, of weapons, of food and resources and everything else. It's like just how things are trafficked around the world, for what purpose, migration of peoples, going all over the place. Really, and I guess a theme that I can kind of end on here for myself is just the concept of roots, and how it's pretty clear to me that we are basically living in a paradigm where our roots have been severed from us in so many different ways, and I think that's clearly by design. And it is with this intermingling of different peoples from around the world. That's also part of the agenda too, is that these people are leaving their home territory, and so in a certain kind of way they're abandoning their roots potentially, or their homeland or whatever. And so I always say that we're people without a pole. You need a spiritual pole, you need that orientation, you need that center. Symbolically, the pole is like embedded into the earth. It's not unlike a world tree. You can use a world tree symbolically to kind of illustrate that whole entire idea. And so regardless of what happens moving forward, having some sort of root system, some sort of support system, some sort of structure, having sort of that stability is really, really crucial moving forward. I think technology, I completely agree. It's definitely coming through all of the AI and everything. Leo King is saying for sure, it's like, it's not going to stop anytime soon. And so in many ways you have to get used to it and just adapt, unless you're going to live a completely hermetic sort of lifestyle or whatever, which, for me, it's like that, I don't know how to do that. And so most people don't. It's like, it's very hard to do that these days, and so I think with technology too, there is the hardware dynamic, but obviously it's the software and the programming that's delivering the dopamine and whatnot, giving people the ability to upload videos and watch streams endlessly and all of that. And so I'm reminded of the correspondence with Aquarius and air. And air symbolism, I live in a very windy place, so I actually am thinking about wind and kind of the air dynamic and airflow and air pressure and stuff like quite a bit. And if you're not grounded, if you're not rooted, if you're not oriented appropriately, you can be taken for a ride. You know what I mean? And so just having sort of that firm ground, I think is really, really crucial more than ever now, because there's so many things vying for your attention. You can literally see something overnight and suddenly find yourself in a brand new rabbit hole, pursuing a new kind of endeavor or project or hobby or lifestyle virtually overnight now. In a traditional society, old school society, that was not possible. It just wasn't working that way. So just being kind of wary too, it's like of what you're consuming online and sort of the type of media you like to watch and stuff. There's egregores and thought forms and spirits embedded in all of these different things. There's a whole conversation to be had about the esoteric aspect of the internet and what's going on there, sort of on a spiritual level. And so I don't know, man. Just people got to be vigilant and kind of aware of what they're doing in that regard. But that's pretty much it. Thank you, once again for the invite. I really enjoyed the conversation and the back and forth with everything. I learned a lot and would be happy to do it again. I think that the energy here, the sort of chemistry between everyone worked really well. But Robert, you're a great host as always, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for dropping by. And people can find you at symbolicstudies.com, and you do tarot readings, and you're also really active on Twitter and YouTube, and you're always kind of updating the symbolism and imagery for the sign that month, and you go into great detail. So people, if you want to learn just on a casual level, just follow Mario on YouTube and Twitter. You'll learn a lot. And thanks for all you do, Mario. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, you got it, man. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Evan, you want to wrap up with something?
I would just want to say, well, first of all, thank you, Robert, for gathering us together again. And Mario, you were a fantastic addition today. So let's all do this again. When I just reflect on what we've talked about and the year ahead, I think about how at some point everything needs to be brought back to some kind of homeostasis or balance. And I think one sign of our kind of lack of balance in our world right now is like health. I mean, with Saturn being in Pisces, I think long-term health, chronic conditions are the centerpiece also this year. And I always think about like, well, okay, what are some of the factors? Like, why are so many people unhealthy? Again, like I said at the very beginning of the show, I was on the airplane. I was like, gosh, I mean, most of the people I'm looking at, they're struggling to even stand up. I think that it's a reflection of like our systems, like social systems also being broken. It's like, you know, one thing to watch out for with like endless technology and content is like social isolation, you know, and I think there's some correlation between that and health, you know, even like physical health. You know, it's like if we're not operating in a system socially like we did when we were villagers, like I think that mirrors like our own body's breakdown. And I know so many people who are struggling with like these unknown ailments, which are coming from, you know, EMFs and other things too. But like, I think a lot of it has to do with like the lack of social cohesion. So it's like we have to get back into some kind of like system. We have to feel like we're in a rhythm every day and like getting feedback from other people, and also not just, you know, consuming endless content. You know, I just want to bring in David Lynch for a second. Like a lot of his films, when you analyze them, were about actually how television is sort of partly the de-evolution of an art form, which is for him, film was like the golden art form, and now we have it. Part of the de-evolution, you could argue, is the phone. And so it's like, well, the phone can connect us and we can do great things like this. You know, it's also like everything in balance, like everything in moderation. We can't just be like, you know, consuming content without actually valuing it or thinking about the value of it. And, you know, I just think once Chiron goes into Taurus next year, I just hope that people like return to like their roots, like Mario said, or return to the land, or, you know, start to look at how the earth even is out of balance right now, whether or not people believe in like climate change as the prime factor or something else. It's like clearly the earth is trying to like get us to rebalance as well. It's trying to remind us, like pillaging just for productivity and profit. You know, maybe that wasn't the original intent. So I just think like everyone should think about how they can bring balance back into their lives and just live the healthiest life possible.
Thanks, Evan. And people can find you at innerworldsastrology.com for more Evan Nathaniel Grim content. So there you go. All right, DP, want to take us out?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again, Mario. It's been a blast to have you here. So stoked. You're a badass addition. It's been great, of course, Robert, and it's been great having you, Evan. I mean, I'm here with Evan, so it's kind of like we'll have our goodbyes together here. But I will mention the EU thing, and then my last words. I think you're right that there can be some tension with the EU, but I think the EU is going to get squeezed because right now it's already squeezed. Right, there's issues with Russia with gas, right, to come in, natural gas, and then of course the stuff that they are taking in is mainly from China, and it starts to present, I think, a lot of issues. So I think we'll see some problems there, but I do feel like independently, these nations in the EU are going to want to leave. I mean, we already saw the Brexit situation happen, and that was at the end of Trump's term. And you're already seeing the UK already having a lot of doubts about their government. Canada, we have to see that come March, during the middle of the craziness, March 24th, the parliament's going to come back, and we're going to see what's going to happen in Canada. So it does feel very much like there's going to be, over these years, the breakaway of the EU, but that puts into question kind of like NATO as being maybe the main thing, where these countries individualize themselves again, but then stay in NATO. And then the big question, does Russia join NATO because they all want to go after China? It kind of is more maybe what I see in long term. I will say that I think what Evan brought up about health is so important, because if you think about Virgo, it makes a quincunx to Aquarius. So there's that societal part. But also just this Pisces, it brings up fibromyalgia to arthritis. Neptune's the planet that really does bring those things that kind of are not seen but are there. So I do feel that people are also, in many ways, kind of like not sure where they are spiritually, or they're so sure. But to be honest, I think the hardest core of anybody is still got a question about it. Like, am I going too far into this? Because there's so much information that does come out that can contradict it or whatnot. So I do feel that that also is a place where you have to be a little loose about things, kind of like, you're kind of into that and this and open to this. You have to stay open during these times, and you definitely have to be connected to others. And then you have to be willing to make, I think the hardest part about Aquarius, people forget about, it's a fixed sign.
Yeah.
So, in order for you to advance, you have to get off the one place that you were so fixed on being. You have to be willing to now take on a new fixed position, which does feel like a pivot, but it's not an easy pivot. I mean, the Titanic had a hard time pivoting from a fucking iceberg. So it's kind of like that. Like when you start to see the iceberg ahead, it might be a little uncomfortable, but you need to start making those pivots. If you start seeing your life where you're not doing much socially and you're too drowned out online, you need to start to pivot to maybe try another thing. And it's not going to be an instant daily thing that just happens in one day overnight, even though I agree with Mario that you can change your whole entire life down a rabbit hole in one night and think you are this new thing and you're going on that way. At the same time, to actually pivot to avoid an iceberg, most people are not wanting to do that, which you kind of have to. I think that there is a way to get out of these harder ways in the systems, but those have been around for a while. So like when we think about credit score, and that also brings up the idea of like more of like a social credit score. But it's weird because if you were to look at the credit score of like an Elon Musk or a billionaire or somebody who actually does make it through this world, they have the worst credit scores because you have to go bankrupt. You have to do this, you have to do that. So the whole world is not run off your credit score. It's run off your valuable ability to make the money, and also how big of payments have you taken on in the past. So it's kind of one of those things to where most people are too afraid to take on the debt in a debt-based system. So that's why you see most people don't make it in the debt-based system, because you have to take on the biggest amounts of debt in order to get the next round of biggest amounts of debt and to be prosperous, which hopefully that system does end. But I do think that there always is going to be the risk taker that is going to come now, I think, through an Aquarian version, which is who's got the systems and the integrations and the things that, you can do, and do you really follow into that? And I think the new technology, before it goes into the brain like a Neuralink, will be VR glasses. And I do feel that the phones are going to be a thing of the past because they'll be integrated in much more of a glasses-oriented aspect. And that's really, I think, the beginnings of that coming next year with Uranus fully ingressed into Gemini. And that's where everything's already been. That was the test of Apple Vision Pro. That's where Oculus is already at. And that's where everything pretty much is from CES this year. If you looked at it, it's all about these, where right now you can go get glasses and just hook it up USB-C to your phone, your computer and everything, and be in full immersion, or have the screen 140 feet and make it look like sunglasses, and even change the color of your glasses as if we are in a movie that you would see. I think that people have to be ready. And I have a hard time because the spiritual community is so like, no, like they want to retreat back to like the caves and be a hermit again. It's just not going to happen. We're not going backwards. That's the thing Aquarius teaches, is you can't go backwards.
Right.
So the new spirituality, I think, is going to be the crazy thing to see, is what does new spirituality look like? Because it's not going to look like Burning Man anymore. We already saw this is the first year of Burning Man in 2024, where they had to like basically give away tickets. And if you watch any of the DJs or anything, like there wasn't that many people there. So, that's, I think, going to be my more thing to like look at, is what does the new spiritual look like? Because the old one is ending with this Pluto Capricorn ending and Neptune Pisces. We saw this like reemergence of like, the Topanga, which unfortunately a lot of those people were just in the fires, or even just the idea of kind of like the 60s, right, movement, and what it looked like the hippie is over. So it's tech is the new hippie. And so that's going to be what I think is going to blow people's minds, is the more you look like a yogi, the less you get involved in anything and get a job or get the ability to get to the next thing. You have to be very Matrix-like and enter the Matrix with the right avatar, and maybe that's not who you really are. But if you notice in the Matrix, they all wore cool sunglasses, black, and drove in the cool old car and shit like that to look badass, even though in the real world they fucking look like shit wearing a gray fucking cotton fucking shirt that's probably like 5,000 years old that's fucking got goop on it. I mean, people are really having to take in, I think, things they haven't before, and the way you do that is by really, I think, doing good research, study, understanding how evolution works and where we are in history and how that works, and doing the things that they avoid. I mean, a lot of people avoid wanting to know more about how the world works, what's happening in the world really. And the 12th house to me is the curious one that actually does peek around the curtain. And that's what Pisces actually is. So even though that rabbit hole looks crazy, you have to be willing to look in all the rabbit holes. And guess what? There is kind of system overload in the 12th house, which does bring on psychic / even like mental health issues. I think mental health is going to be the biggest issue of our lives coming forward, and the health part of it. That definitely is there. We have to be careful of psych wards turning into old psych wards, because we are coming into the transits of when they built the psych kind of ward energy, and these crazy fucking, put you into a fucking crazy place for a long time. And we're already seeing that with long COVID. It just came out this week that now if you go to a hospital and you say that you have long COVID, they throw you in the psych ward. So that's true. You can look that up. It was Newsweek main article, and
I saw that.
Are doing now. They think you're crazy. Yeah. So
yeah.
I think, and I'm going to end with that. We're in a world right now where Pisces is about being the hidden spiritual person in many ways. You need to know when to say the stuff and know when not to. You have to feel it out. You can't. The 12th house, Pisces is crazy because you might have spiritual views, but you need to know how to know with Pluto and Aquarius now, who's the right person to say that to. It's not about restricting who you are as a person. It's about understanding, engaging what's happening. And is this the right moment? Is this the right person to just say this to? I think people are going to have to really tap into this whole new energy of how to get through, opposed to this kind of like, do this way and go to college and have a degree and do that. Like, all of that is ending. And the human design prophecy that Rob put out is 100% happening. I mean, I do believe there is a new species of human. The rave is showing up, and they do not follow things the same way. We are moving in the body graph where the emotional center is becoming the main thing. And you're already seeing that build right now with everything in Pisces and everything in these gates. You're seeing people not able to handle what's happening in the news and stuff like that, not knowing how to self-survive with the 2034 coming in, which is the manifesting generator gates. I don't think that a lot of people are ready to survive and handle the emotional stuff and not react emotionally to things, and be able to have a gauge on the world and know when to respond and know how to get to where you need to, opposed to this, it should just work for me the way I want it to work, where it's like, no, it's all about a cohesion between you and the universe. So allowing it to happen and knowing when to strike at the right moment, and not even thinking for a second, but reacting to it and doing it. And a lot of people are not well equipped for that. They have to get out of the 9 to 5 first. And I think that's the hardest thing for people. Like, because if you're still on the 9 to 5, you haven't even come into the real spiritual understanding of what it looks like to not have that attachment to something that takes weeks upon weeks to get out of your brain. You wake up every morning at 9 a.m. going, I'm going to be late. Oh, wait, hold on a second. I'm not. You have to get rid of that. Is the hardest core drug there has ever been on the planet, that's been going on for the last 150 years in our sleep, Pisces, and the dream realm is going to change, because we used to do 2 sleeps for all of humanity up until the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, people had sex at midnight. Socialization was at midnight. So when you see people out at the club at midnight, that was normal for thousands of years. This idea that you go to bed at 10 a.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m. is the craziest thing that's ever happened to humanity. And so there was second sleep, and most people went to bed their second time in the morning when the sun came up, believe it or not. So that's I'm done with that.
By the way, do you know who started the 9 to 5 work week? It was Stalin and Lenin. The 9 to 5 work week comes out of the Soviet Union. Prior to that, people worked 12 hours, 13 hours a day. So this idea of work in general has been around for a very long time. But the 40-hour work week comes out of Leninism and Stalinism. You brought up something really.
I will say this could be the change of the calendar system because of what happens over the fall of the Industrial Revolution and the work week and the idea of the religious weeks and so forth. That what if there is no more days in a week? How would that psychologically work for people who've been attached to that system?
Well, it's going to change already, because we have daylight savings time is going to be full time, right? I mean, I think they're about to vote that in. So it is going to change. I mean, I think that's the first change. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So you brought up something about the 12th house. I just want to riff off of a little bit and then we'll get out of here. You know, I did a deep dive on the 12th house a couple months ago, and I looked at a number of people who have 12th house sons, yourself included. You know, people like Billy Bob Thornton, Keanu Reeves, Madonna. And when you look at people who have 12th house sons, one of the things that really emerges is that they tend to be very archetypal people, right? Like when you think of Keanu Reeves, I think of like a cyber Christ. Or when I think of Madonna, I think of Madonna. You know, she's a type. And even Billy Bob Thornton, you know, even though he's played all these roles, there's something about him that is kind of uniquely Billy Bob Thornton. And even yourself, David, there's something very kind of archetypal about you. And when I went into the 12th house, because I was really curious, like, why are all these famous people 12th house sons? Wouldn't they have their son in a different part of the chart? Wouldn't they have it in the first house or maybe the 10th house? And then it dawned on me that these people have this kind of archetypal resonance. And I thought, well, this is fascinating. Why? Well, why is that? Because the 12th house is the gateway to the collective unconscious. And that this is the realm of myth, right? And so somebody like Keanu Reeves, who plays Neo and other figures, he's always like this kind of, you know, this kind of savior or this cyber Christ person. And so if we're in that 12th house place, which is what you were talking about, and maybe this is where this idea of madness kind of bleeds through, that it's incumbent upon us to find what our archetype is. Like, who are we at a very deep level that is really transcendent? It's also integrated into who we are. It's part of our persona, but each of us exists at a very, very deep level. So during this transit with the true node in Pisces and, you know, Neptune and Saturn in the back and forth, I think this spirituality piece is really about the archetypal understanding of who we are at a deeper level. You know, it's like, for instance, you know, maybe Evan is the wizard archetype, right? And he can move from that position. And David, you have your own archetype. And, you know, Mario, you're like the Hierophant or something like that, right? So we, you know, on a certain level, it may sound cliche and, you know, sort of easy to classify. But when you start to really immerse yourself in that world and you begin to feel it from the inside out, your life changes and you become a living myth or a living expression of art itself, right? And I feel like that's independent of everything, you know, and yeah, we're going to have future shock and we're going to have, you know, this acceleration of technology and events. But also independent of that is like who we are at a soul level. And then, you know, how that manifests through us as an archetype. So thanks for bringing up the 12th house, David. And because when people like, you know, when people
can I just say one thing with it?
Yeah.
Like, that'll make sense for what you said, because especially as one myself.
Right.
It's the guaranteed chart that the progressed sun will cross the ascendant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whenever I look at somebody's chart in their 7th house, of course the progressed sun's never going to cross the ascendant. They never are going to figure out who they really are except through somebody else.
No.
Right. So the 12th house sun is the only one besides some 11th house ones. And then of course, 10th house ones eventually get it. Right. Like the farther you go out, though, it becomes weirder in life and stuff. But the 12th house sun brings the essence of the actual soul into the identity young, early, and goes to the most messiest stuff. Drugs, alcohol, all the 12th house stuff, right? So Billy Bob Thornton, he's relatable to me since he has so much fucking Leo 12th house. Like, he's more than me. That guy is more Leo than any other fucking chart. And here he is out of nowhere, right? Everybody forgot about him. Everybody remembers him as Angelina Jolie's fucking big love, right? Whatever. And he did some movies. And of course, and out of nowhere, he pops up and now he's on the #1 show on Paramount Plus, like representing America and not like the people who drive fucking Super Duty trucks and oil and smoke cigarettes and fucking #1 fucking show, right? Like, out of nowhere. And he improvises on every movie. He does not read the script and go by the script. Every scene that Billy Bob Thornton has ever done has been an improvisation, right? So it's about improving. And so what was my number one thing in school? I was in advanced improv in the head of that. It's the life to know how to improvise. And most people don't know how to do that. Most people want to have a system. They want to have a thing. And a 12th houser has been at the rock bottom, snorting a line, eating an ecstasy pill, losing themselves in the worst relationship to find their spirituality. Not by going to the church, not by going to the perfect way or the perfect ceremony where it's all perfect and everybody's doing yoga. No, the 12th houser learned it by being in the fucking streets, in the sewer, smoking a cigarette with their shirt off and laughing their ass off on acid.
And by the way, what is Billy Bob Thornton's show about? It's about oil, right? Which is a Piscean.
Yeah, it's about the oil business and how it's coming to its end at the same time too, and how are they going to keep it going, but also knowing it's coming to a close. Yeah.
So I think you brought this full circle, because when you are living as an archetype, you can improvise. You can interact with life at a creative level or from a creative position. And when you have that kind of archetypal understanding about who you are, it's just easier. So I think it's going to be going to be good to have this true node in Pisces while all this crazy, Aquarian stuff is going down. Because it'll be, I think, a real, I wouldn't call it a holiday, but I think it'll give people a chance to reflect at who they are at a much deeper level. And sometimes that can be quite painful, but other times it can be an amazing adventure to go there and to understand that. So anyway, I want to wrap it up. I want to thank you gentlemen for being here tonight. You've all been really generous with your time and your insights, and all of it has just been, really spot on. And we'll do this again sometime. And I want to thank people who stayed here. We've had about 700 people in here the whole night. And I want to thank them for their patience, especially at the beginning when my signal was not as strong as it was as we relocated. So, all right. That's about it. Take care. Take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves. God bless. Love each other. Treat each other well. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
See ya.